3. I remember 2005.
And now coming up on the inside track, here comes Tony Blair.
I remember the first YouTube video.
Alright, so here we are, one of the elephants.
I remember Katrina. I remember Photograph. I remember Chuck Norris and Leroy Jenkins and Michael Moore. I remember the UK release of Team America World Police.
We're reckless, arrogant, stupid dicks.
I remember the War on Terror.
We are ready for the greatest achievements in the history of freedom.
I remember the attack on 7/7.
Been reports of an explosion outside Liverpool Street Station.
I remember the trial of Saddam Hussein. I remember the protests. I remember the fear and the headlines and the debates about foreign threats. I remember how we got there.
America came under attack today from international terrorists on a scale that made it more an act of war.
I call upon all nations to do everything they can to stop these terrorist killers.
I remember my dad telling me it was always like this. I remember how we escaped.
GamerCube.
I remember Call of Duty. I remember Battlefield. I remember Sam Fisher and a hedgehog with a gun and playing an alien invader. I remember Resident Evil 4. I remember 2005. The saying goes that great horror is timeless. Vampires, ghosts, haunted spaces, and cosmic gods. Even zombies can be traced back to Haitian folklore. But great horror can also dissect the fear of the year and mutate it into something tangible for us to confront. Just look at what the Satanic Panic did to the genre, or how slasher films sparked at a time where people were encouraged to distrust their neighbors.
This is no ritual. It's terrorism.
Isn't that a popular word these days?
Resident Evil 4 is a timeless video game with a very timely horror focus. In 2005, it exposed the brooding fear that grew after the Twin Towers fell and meshed it with folk horror. Leon Kennedy was a stranger in a strange land, fighting religious zealots planning to burrow into the United States of America. It was a story that spoke to people. Capcom, being a Japanese company, didn't isolate it from that timeliness. In fact, the country introduced laws that authorized military action to support the efforts of the United States. The weight of 9/11 reached every corner of the globe, and just a cursory glance at Japanese media during the period shows a country that shared that general fear of outsiders. Resident Evil's America has always been written through the lens of American media and Hollywood films. So for a Japanese developer, a horror game where you play as a US government agent in a strange, isolated community was ripe to exploit xenophobia. It's not that the game is problematic or Islamophobic, though interestingly, parts of Salazar's castle have environmental design pulled from mosques like Al-Masjid and Nabawi. But understanding the world it was born into is key to seeing how, despite its cheese and jokes, it was still a powerful horror game. Years later, that feeling still holds with the remake. Tweaks and changes embed the mechanical tension in a fresh way. Leon wades through a story that's alien without being alienating, and Los Illuminados still preys on a fear of the other. When comparing it to the original, I have a couple of complaints. Minor changes, a frustrating cut, and the dashing of my favourite Resident Evil line of all time do give me pause. But it's how the remake reimagines its predecessor that stays with me. Resident Evil 4 is an epic, a horror odyssey that somehow manages to keep the fear, harbour the tension, conjure a very special feeling, and doesn't diminish the importance of the 2005 version. So, join me as we save the world and the girl one more time. This is a commentary and critique of Resident Evil 4. Prior to 2005, Resident Evil was a series about how hurt people don't need to hurt people. All of our heroes are eventual victims of trauma, and all of them just want to help others. In Resident Evil 4, through the lens of Jack Krauser, that would change, but before him, our villains weren't victims. They were just bastards. Nikolai, Sadler, Brian Irons, and Alfred Ashford's minds have snapped, but they were always monsters. Albert Wesker is eventually given a dark past, but he was a prick long before he learned about his origins. Leon Scott Kennedy embodies this message, a victim of Raccoon City's madness who's determined to finally save someone. He failed to in Resident Evil 2. He failed to in Resident Evil The Dark Side Chronicles, more on that later. So, when we pick up with him in Resident Evil 4, the game makes it clear that that is our character theme. Speaking to Behind the Voice, Nick Apostolidis talked about Leon's mindset going into 4 Remake.
Leon's genuine. He gets jaded as he gets older, but he's got a good heart and means well. He just wants to help people around him. A big source of his PTSD as he gets older is that he's had to lose so many people around him. That kills him. It eats away at him. Every iteration of him is a little bit different, but that's the heart.
We drop into a dream of the other.
I mean, last week there was a search for some missing hikers. I'm sure you'll do your best to help me.
6 years after the fall of Raccoon City, Leon Kennedy is far from home, out on a mission to rescue the president's daughter. As part of a deal to protect Sherry Birkin, he's been forced into working for the US government. The Umbrella Corporation is gone, and with it the zombies, tyrants, and shambling corpses. What remains are memories and ghosts. Something else is waiting in the woods. There's an emphasis on distant threats watching us, never far behind, that carries the tone of the first third of the game before things get more claustrophobic. The camera watches from under cars or through branches as we set the scene. The game repeats and repeats the importance of Leon being alone in the wilderness. He's far from his usual setting, in both genre and tone. For Spanish speakers, a couple of the creeping tactics that the game deploys in its opening will be less powerful. The language barrier adds a lot to the sense of unease. But it's not just that Resident Evil 4 takes us out of Raccoon City and throws us into rural Spain, it's that aside from the language, this isn't rural Spain. Speaking to Nintendo Dream, Hiroyuki Kobayashi said,
"We cared a lot about evoking a European atmosphere, so we decided to make the language Spanish. But we didn't base it on some pre-existing town in Europe, where E4 doesn't take place in Spain, but we use Spanish anyway."
We are in Valdelobos, the Valley of Wolves in Spain. None of that information is in Resident Evil 4, it's saved for Umbrella Corps, a bad game determined to kill the mystery of the series, cast it out of your mind. But in the painting of Resident Evil 4, it's just an unplaceable, unmarked location in Europe, somewhere warped, otherworldly. The clothes of the villagers are ragged and out of time. Yellow paper, crooked furniture, old cabins, and moulding wood set it back decades. Pesetas are the currency, but in the year Leon arrives, it should be the euro. The inaccuracies give it a dreamy feel, rushed along by its structure. 1 minute you're fighting for your life in a creepy village, and then whoosh, here's an old Castilian castle. Whoosh, here's a merchant with purple fire and an odd accent, greeting us warmly. With a single exception, the boat ride to the island, we travel the full mad map of Resi 4 ourselves in gameplay, meaning excessive cutscenes and transitions don't detach us from the journey. We need to find our way through the dream. Typical for the series, Resident Evil 4 has more in common with magical realism than a realistic interpretation of its setting. Back in 2005, the accents were off, and players who spoke the language found it comical. In the remake, that's now been fixed in the name of authenticity, but even with accents pitched to the Spain that we know, the feeling of being a man out of time remains. Eventually, when attack does come, the locals will point with wild eyes and a guttural, repetitive "Un forastero, an outsider." If you don't speak Spanish, the language will sound alien to you, confusing, but because it's a recognizable foreign tongue, it sounds intelligent, pointed. When our monsters bark orders to each other, we don't fully understand them. We don't know what strategies they're employing. Confusion breeds tension. Tension breeds panic. Leon speaks a little rough Spanish in the remake, something that paints our boy as better prepared. Good for him, but I think connecting him in any way to the village gets in the way of that alien feeling. In 2005, Leon's ignorance added a level of menace to our enemies because the signs dotted around were left untranslated. It meant our sense of direction wasn't helped while we navigated the forestry or tried to find our sense of place. In 2023, the signposts are translated. Lago, for example, is stated as lake. Thankfully, the language is obscured where it matters. A hunter's cabin, words scrawled on walls in blood. Felts and guts and sharp tools shroud the space with explainable gore. There's no music as gameplay is handed to us, just the sounds of rushing water, the squawk of crows, and wind blowing through the trees. Distance is maximized from the hustle and bustle of safety. A quiet, slow opening sets a tone of unfamiliarity.
Sorry to barge in like this. Busco a un policía. Vino aquí?
Leon breaks the neck of the first ganado we meet, so we're faced with a different feeling from what 2005 gave us. There, it was all about how ordinary he felt. He was doing chores, so there was an initial false sense of security. The guy was just minding his own business. His eyes, his complexion, his clothing were all strange, in keeping with the otherness of the setting, but he didn't seem murdery. Well, I called that wrong. In the remake, things get dark fast. A sick and twisted image of a fractured man lunging at us in his basement. We're trapped in there with him. Bottled into the remake, this is a tense, panicky opening, but showing the parasite wriggling out of the side of his snapped neck does spoil the later reveal that these aren't just brainwashed cultists. In 2005, that reveal was saved until nightfall. We're not just dealing with mindless zombies anymore. They plot, plan, scheme, and have built an entire small civilization with the intention of protecting themselves from us. To them, we are the other. Above all else, Resident Evil 4 tests a player's ability to remain calm under pressure. The first gush of violence brings with it further isolation. When Leon emerges from the cabin, he's cut off from the outside world altogether. The bridge is out, our guides are missing. Loneliness begins to thaw Leon's cool confidence. Despite there being a simple path to follow to the village, the architecture of the woods feels broad, like it's hiding a million watching eyes. The color palette isn't brown and grey anymore, a technique that makes the original game stink. Now it's a blue, gloomy darkness. The shifting color doesn't stop the forest from bleeding together though, broken up by sharp trees, branches, and black crows that bluster into life. Just like with Resident Evil 2's opening, darkness is key. It makes the player paranoid, tricking us for a second, making us think something will smash out of the wilderness.
Shit.
What is it about this first battle in the village that's so memorable? It's not just the ambush. This is a video game. We've had to fight waves of enemies before. It's the awareness of the player. It's about predicting what we'll do and punishing us for it. Back in 2005, the game was more po-faced about our presence. Ingrid Hunnigan, the voice in Leon's ear, called us up Metal Gear Solid style to tell us to read the playing manual for God's sake. Hunnigan no longer breaks the fourth wall, but that awareness of the player is intact in the game design. An open environment with numerous huts to run into, dead ends to get trapped in, and rooftops to leap across give us options. You're encouraged to break through the panic of the horde and start thinking tactically. Can I group the ganados together at the bottom of the stairs for an easy grenade kill? If I set this cow on fire, will it light up the monsters? Oh god, no, it's mad. We have to survive for, give or take, 4.5 minutes, depending on how many ganados we kill. And the game doesn't communicate that, so we feel lost and confused. Do I have to kill everything? Do I have enough ammo? What about if I run up the church tower and just cover the exit? That worked a treat back in the old days. Oh wait, oh god, the floor broke underneath me. Okay, let's dash in here. This is a small house, so I can just camp and cover the door. Oh Christ, there's a couple in here having dinner. Sorry guys. Phew, a shotgun. Wait. What's that sound? We're introduced almost immediately to a new weirdness. The ganados are just the tip of the iceberg. The next rung down is Doc Salvador, our chainsaw happy boy. The bag masks his identity. We can't see his face. We can't hear his voice, which makes him even more detached from reality than his brethren. And they're already strange enough. When Leon reaches the village square and we see the bonfire burning one of our friendly guides, it's not just a murder. It's not framed as the villagers protecting themselves. It's a ritual. It's sadistic. When our time is up and the church bell tolls ominously in the distance, the game toys with us just a beat longer. We don't flip straight into a cutscene like in 2005. The ganados stop and stare in gameplay before we even get our title screen. Despite how story-heavy Resident Evil 4 is, it works hard to find opportunities to make us question, even if it's just for a couple of seconds. Why have they all stopped attacking? What do I do?
Where's everyone going? Bingo?
Despite the cheese of a beloved line, it makes our fear of the other start to bleed. It's not a coincidence that, in 2005, Leon lost his jacket when a storm started to rage and night finally fell. Look at this man. Look how sad and cold and isolated he is. Despite the glory of the RE engine, the storm isn't quite as icy in the remake. That's mainly because, aside from our opening, it's not as dark. Lightning, moonlight, and roaring fires guide him, creating an atmosphere that basks in gloom rather than shivers in it. But the sun's not setting yet, and we've got a village to explore.
Routes to Condor 1. I've identified a route to the lake. Look for a large windmill. There's a path on the far side of it.
Windmill. Copy that.
Partly because loading screens have been cut, Resident Evil 4 Remake doesn't feel as segregated as its predecessor. The original game's village had an intense memorability, a thick, musty stink of Linyon, but that memory is filled with spaces that are thinly veiled combat arenas. The village square, the canyon, the fish farm. We remember these locations because of the intense fights that they were built around. Once the monsters were dead and the dust had settled, we weren't encouraged to settle into these places because Leon was always moving forwards. Aside from a couple of spinels, there wasn't much reason to explore. The backtracking that was part of Resi's DNA was minimal. Ammo was gifted by dead bodies, not hidden in cabinets and drawers. But now the village has had an overhaul. Running and gunning doesn't make a space empty and safe because some enemies stay hidden. Now, there are random ganados waiting to appear, so we're kept on our toes. This poor guy's just sitting on the toilet in the chief's manor. Lucky placement because he made me shit myself. One ganado burst out of a cupboard in the village square after the ambush and they all marched on to the church. The beautiful thing is he's actually meant to be here to jump you during the ambush, but doesn't despawn if you miss him. He lurks and remains and waits. The village isn't just a carefully crafted zone for fighting, it feels real, tangible, like it reacts to Leon's presence while existing before he arrives. The color palette isn't the only thing that's changed, the environmental storytelling has as well. Hey look, wind turbines! Say what you like about Sadler, but at least he's eco-friendly. Brown crops, abate air, piles of dead diseased animals, and carts full of rotting meat tell us that it's dying. The corn has withered, cows are turning to wet mush. All that remains are the chickens. Good thing Leon likes his eggs in the morning. Evidence of cult activity is everywhere, interactive in nature or uneasy in presentation. Memos and diary entries flesh out the history of the village, so there's less that's implied and more that's detailed. There's a whole variety of voices here, from grieving victims to zealous Castellans. A secret note in the chief's manor reads,
Date, October 10th. The weather has been strange of late. The wheat withers and the cows grow thin. Date, December 8th. There are signs of famine. We lack the means to work the fields. The Lord Sadler's orders are absolute.
Why are none of the beds slept in? Why, in 2005, were they stained as if they've been untouched and unclean for months? Are the ganados doing chores and working through the night? We learn that the village patriarchs cast lots for who to sacrifice to appease their god, desperately hoping their crops would be blessed. With that knowledge, it's possible to think the ganados are constantly working, never sleeping, Sadler wielding their hive mind as a tool to work the village into the ground. Way shrines clothed in purple, strange puzzles relating to their rituals, sacrificial tables sit covered in blood, obsessive talismans hang everywhere. Locations like the canyon are here as a defense mechanism for the village, a carefully constructed means of preventing the outside world from reaching Castle Salazar. Apostate statues stream blood when you pull their head off, wonderfully weird and psychotic presentation. What isn't wonderfully weird are the splashes of yellow that Los Illuminados have sloshed all over to undermine the level design. Yellow ladders, yellow paint, yellow, yellow, yellow. I don't know guys, do you think I can go through there? Probably not. Yes, I know, nobody wants to hear about it anymore, and yellow paint has become so tired that we're even sick of criticizing it, but it continues to be a distraction, especially in a hyper-immersive horror series. For those of you who are rolling your eyes and think I'm overreacting, let me direct you to the Scratched Emerald. Later, in Salazar's castle, we see the purest example of signposting that does not trust the player. An optional treasure hunt tasks us with needing to find an emerald that a crow has stolen. As we enter the courtyard where that crow is, we see it fly over to the nest where the emerald waits. That's more than enough visual information to tell us that that is the crow we're looking for, and yes, that is indeed its nest. Don't worry though, a cultist has dumped some yellow paint on it just in case. The overemphasis on Hex FD-FD96 is surprising because of the attention to detail elsewhere. whether through gameplay or aesthetic. During the ambush in the village square, using a sniper rifle to shoot the bell ends it early, tricking the ganados. The various scattered signposts are crude replicas of the Los Illuminados symbol, pulling from the look of Las Plagas. The church in the center of the village is no longer a crypt, but a ceremonial chamber with piles of skulls adorning the walls. That's notable both here and in 2005 because the Plagas emerge by bursting out of the cultists' heads. It seems like the skull is treated like an important sacred part of the human anatomy because it's a birthing canal for the parasite. Dropping Resident Evil into a rural location brings that contrast of old and new without needing to rely on gothic environments, although Castle Salazar eventually does exactly that and is a series standout. Claustrophobia comes from the trees and wobbling shacks, but it's the vastness of the village that keeps the fear. Massive doors, thin walkways, ropey bridges with long drops, forestry that stretches on forever, a wide lake with something humongous lurking underneath. Urban environments, even if they're abandoned or teeming with monsters, have a psychological disadvantage that the wilderness avoids: busyness. With busyness comes survivors, backup, strength in numbers. It's why the RPD was so powerful in Resident Evil 2, and the clock tower was so important to the feeling of Resident Evil 3 before it was hacked away with a blunt machete in the remake. But hey, I've harped on about that one enough. The village breeds isolation by default. Even when Luis Serra enters the story as an ally, even when we catch glimpses of Ada Wong, even when Ashley Graham is under our protection, Leon is very much alone in an unfamiliar landscape that makes him feel small. This is especially true of the game's first few chapters, but the scale of Resident Evil 4 is front and center. As the village expands, transforming from something bizarre but recognizable to a wild dreamscape of temples, castles, complexes, and underground hives, our sense of place remains, but all sense of mastering it starts to slip. The beautiful thing about Resident Evil 4 Remake is the weird remains tangible, so you don't feel like you're being whipped from one set piece to another. How does it do that? By bringing backtracking back. That was an option in 2005, but structurally the game wasn't set up to encourage it. You were rewarded for checking in corners and around pillars, and reminded of the optional rocket launcher on display in Salazar's castle, but those beats are more common in the remake. The Red 9 sits in the middle of the Great Lake, a weapon that once belonged to an outsider and was inevitably carved up on a sacrificial table. The same goes for the assault rifle in the castle and the submachine gun on the island. But it's not just treasure or weapons you get for venturing off the beaten path, it's lore as well, dusted history and well-worn details. A perfect example sits in the lab of Luis Serra.
That hurts, you know? Seemed like you really wanted to talk. How observant, senor. Now, you got a smoke?
Luis is the second character to ask Leon about a smoke. There's nothing to analyze there, I just wanted to mention it. For mysterious reasons, he's been locked away by the village chief, Torres Mendez. It seems he got on Los Illuminados' bad side, but they deem him too valuable to kill just yet. Leon is a victim of that mentality too. When Mendez steps out of the dark and grabs him, he doesn't crush our skull. Instead, he infects Leon with Las Plagas and leaves him alone with Luis to incubate. Either because he's been burned before, or because Luis is just a slippery customer, Leon's not ready to trust him. Regardless, the Spaniard tells us that he heard the villagers have moved a señorita to a church over the hill. We have our next stop. When Leon wakes, he's no longer in Luis's lab. He's been dumped a mile away in a rundown factory. But as a testament to the game's lean toward backtracking, you can come back here. If you do, you're rewarded with a document that hints at Luis' past. The files carry gravitas, not just because there are so many here. In 2005 there were 26 to find, the remake more than doubles that, but because they give us legions of information that aren't spelled out in cutscenes. Luis' backstory, the tragic past of Mendez, the history of Los Illuminados and the Salazars, Krauser's role as a tactician, the experiments behind Verdugo and Pasanta, all of this and more are buried in memos we need to hunt for. Much like the Spencer Mansion and Umbrella were treated in Resident Evil 1, Los Illuminados is shrouded in mystery for the first half of our game time. The backtracking makes the answers feel earned. Each of our acts, the village, castle, and island, have a moment. A moment where our initial exploration ends and we're given the chance to expand our search, returning to old areas to hunt treasure, gather resources, uncover secrets, and use tools like the Way Shrine keys to upgrade Leon. Optional puzzles lie in wait, like collecting medallions near the lake. We need to use the boat and push into secret coves, solving even more optional puzzles as we go. Locked drawers are strewn around the village and the castle, waiting for our return and gifting precious resources, ammunition, herbs, and jewels. Small keys unlock them, something beautifully carried over because of what they do to player psychology. They signpost that backtracking is important early on, right here in the village square, while introducing a simple way to feel like we're conquering the space outside of combat. With every drawer unlocked and treasure discovered, that feeling grows. Backtracking. We love backtracking. You know what else we love? Traps. The way the remake handles traps is hit or miss. Back in 2005, Resident Evil 4's vastness didn't mean Capcom forgot about the importance of an environment feeling lethal separate from the monsters. Many of these were relegated to Castle Salazar, spiked ceilings that threatened to gouge Leon, a whirling bladed contraption, thundering catapults, a humongous animatronic statue that chased us, but the village had its fair share as well. A boulder that chased us down a cliffside is seared into my memory. In the remake, the spiked ceilings and boulder have been cut. The bladed contraption has been moved into Ada's campaign. The gigantic statue doesn't chase us, it sits in place. A damn shame on all counts, but there are replacements. The boulder's gone, but dynamite triggers a rock slide for us to dodge. Loose walkways outside the clock tower plunge us to our death. The statue might now be fixed in place, but a flamethrower in its mouth threatens to singe us. Because Los Illuminados are determined to keep the stranger out, the villagers have laid rugged, intentional traps all over, and these too suffer from surprising leniency. A highlight are the snakes hidden in crates and barrels. If we're not quick, they'll jump us. It makes even gathering resources tense. But then there are swarms of bats that rush us in caves. They don't do damage. Tripwires make a return, and because Leon can crouch now, we don't need to waste a bullet to deactivate them. We can creep over and unpick them with our hands. Good thing there's yellow tape on this one. I wouldn't have seen the big red light. Bear traps sit in woodland paths, and if he doesn't tread carefully, they'll latch around Leon's ankle. I say latch rather than something more violent like snap or crush, because they don't do any damage anymore. They just slow Leon down and make him vulnerable to attack. They're a useful tool for the Ganados, not a terrifying part of the space, so they're worthless when enemies aren't around. The village is given its stench of death because of the beings that live here. At the detriment of its level tension, we are reminded that it wasn't always like this.
Your blood has accepted the gift.
The manor of Chief Mendez is a strange place. Photographs line the walls, pictures of the village before Los Illuminados seeped in. The table is prepared for dinner, indicating a specific level of sentience that the villagers don't have. Something separates Mendez from the others, a special breed of Las Plagas. Despite being connected to the wider hive mind, he seems to have retained his memories and personality. It's just that what once were good intentions have been warped and flayed. Looking deep into Leon's eyes, Mendez sees that the parasite is starting to incubate. We've accepted his so-called gift. A camera is kept safely away in his attic, a memento of a better time before the age of Sadler. The array of pictures, the sheer number of them, seem to be a subconscious attempt to break past the brainwashing and remember what the village once was. And it seems he's not the only one able to fight the parasite. So, let's meet up with an old friend.
Over here, stranger.
You can't kill the merchant in Resident Evil 4 Remake. Moving on. Just kidding, of course there's more to say here, but I want to hone in on this and nitpick. The merchant arrives mysteriously with a strong accent, a covered face, and a glorious torch that heralds his presence. Back in 2005, he could die if we shot him in the head. He wouldn't just die, he would despawn, vanishing from the game altogether on professional difficulty. What this did was punish the player for their paranoia. You're encouraged to distrust human-looking others because of everything that's happened before. As the merchant's eyes grow more crimson, setting up shop in darker hovels, his position hints at menace. If you let that get the better of you, you lose an ally that is pivotal to evolving as a hero. It's notable that our friendly old merchant refers to Leon as stranger whenever he sees him, one more reminder that Leon is an outsider and very far from home. Our companions never acknowledge him. Both Luis and Ashley are with us when we bump into him, and neither questions his presence. It adds to that feeling of dreaming of the other. Who is this man? Why is he helping Leon? Why were his eyes red? And why aren't they anymore?
Oh, my back is killing me. Years haven't been kind to us, I suppose.
In the castle, the merchant mutters that the world hasn't been kind to us. Now, that could be the accent talking. Some English people refer to themselves singular as us. Weird. But what if it isn't? What if there are many merchants? A whole group of them? Or better yet, what if he's talking about some other entity that's latched onto him? It's less obvious in the remake, but his eyes have a tint, similar to that of the Ganados under the control of Las Plagas. What's odd is the merchant seems to have kept his senses. Sadler's influence hasn't touched him. There are beings infected with the parasite that retain their free will and human appearance. Sadler, Salazar, Chief Mendez, Krauser, 4 men who have a special, older, undiluted variant of the parasite. Maybe the merchant is one of them. That would certainly explain the importance of his torch. We learn later that blue torches can freeze Las Plagas, but in the remake, the merchant's torch is violet, not blue. A weird change, but who's to say that violet isn't just a more effective flame that he's created himself? And even if it isn't, there's the wispy blue flame from his lamp to consider. Despite the accent, Stranger implies that the merchant is from around here. He labels both Ada and Leon with it, 2 outsiders. Perhaps he was a traveler who laid down roots here and was infected with Las Plagas in the early days. As a way to get revenge, he's dedicated himself to arming anyone who wants to kick some cult ass. That hatred of the cult comes through with the various notes and tasks he sets Leon. Petty stuff like destroying their medallions. He doesn't just want Leon to save the girl and save the world, he wants to eradicate the memory of Los Illuminados, and he's brought a small army with him to help. What he is a representative of calm and safety. It's an important feeling to the ebb and flow of Resi 4's pacing, and honestly, might explain why the color of his torch has changed. Violet's a more soothing color than blue. The mystery that surrounds the merchant matters. He'd lose a lot of his fan-favorite status if he came with a lore dump, because the theorizing that his world around him has made him iconic in the minds of fans. And what's also made him iconic is his playful nature. His dialogue is so wild and carefree that he brings joviality to Leon's adventure. It adds to the relief of a save room. Previous Resident Evil games bottled that feeling through the soundtrack, and we'll talk about the music in a minute, but the merchant's shop acts as an audio-visual and mechanical port in a storm. A mysterious elevator dings open behind him, leading down into an impossible basement, a sub-layer of the village's dream. Down there is a shooting gallery that lathers the player with endless praise. Both Luis and Ashley compliment us as we work, and if they're not around, the merchant fills that gap. What's beautiful about the shooting gallery in the remake is that it's been rejigged to feel more present as a mechanic. Back in 2005, it was bizarre, showing up in Salazar's castle like a recently refurbished room that's always been there. Another weird pocket of the dream. Now, they appear a few times across all 3 of our primary locations, here to let us earn tokens as slot into a gacha machine. What comes out of the machine are boons that can be equipped, ways to give Leon an edge in fights. The handgun attachment lets us have 30% more ammo when crafting handgun bullets. It's a cool system, though a little short-sighted because you can't stack charms to emphasize effects. The vibe of the shooting gallery has changed, for the worse. I love pirates, some say a little too much. Quick recommendation for Rogue Waters, by the way, it's a great pirate tactical game, I'm a little bit obsessed. But making them the consistent theme in every shooting gallery is odd. Back in the original, the shooting gallery was themed around Resident Evil 4 as a game. We shot Ganados, sometimes Ramon Salazar's dumb little face popped up and you can shoot it. It was in keeping with Leon's mission, and for the remake, it would align nicely with the merchant's hatred of Los Illuminados. Pirates feel random. What else is strange, both in the original and the remake, is how the merchant always comes with a typewriter for us to save our progress, but sometimes we'll find typewriters separately from him. And both of these save points come with different musical themes. The merchant gets Serenity, which has been tweaked in the remake. It capitalizes on the ethereal sound of the 2005 song. Both have that distorted warbling that makes whatever instruments they use unrecognizable. You recognize something. Is that a flute? But it's been warped, turned into something new. The thrum underneath keeps a sense of calm, waves lapping gently at our door. But what the remake does is make that distortion less pronounced than the original. Both versions characterize the merchant. Friendly, chilled, but strange. I prefer Remake's version of Serenity because there's an ominous, brooding tone that it carries. A reminder that something waits on the other side of that door. I feel very differently when it comes to the save theme. It plays when Leon interacts with a typewriter, later growing more somber after the helicopter pilot Mike dies in a blazing inferno. That's a neat touch, but I think the remake's version sounds too busy. That all-important gentle pluck of the harp gets drowned out by clinical, synth-like sounds that bring to mind a laboratory rather than a strange, rural community. I understand the idea, foreshadowing Los Illuminados' scientific presence early, but I think it loses the simplicity of the original that made it so iconic. Take a deep breath. This might be your last chance to. Finding a typewriter like here in this random shack near the windmill feels like a diluted save point. If the merchant is a port, the solo typewriters are random sailboats. Not a point of safety, not a chance to catch our breath. And when looking at the game holistically, the sheer number of them feel oversaturated. Especially because chapter screens save our progress as well, something I've always felt adds unnecessary breaks to the tension and horror. Case in point, the typewriter that sits at the merchant's dock before our first boss fight, followed a few seconds later by the chapter screen that bookends it. Del Lago, translating as From the Lake, was one of Los Illuminados' earlier experiments. A parasite latched onto a salamander and morphed it into a gargantuan leviathan, dumped into the Great Lake because the cult lost control of it. Prior to Leon's arrival, it slept. It's been reawakened to stop us. Del Lago is a fine boss fight, both here and in the original. It's a gimmick, though placing Leon in a rickety boat in the middle of the lake brings a sense of vulnerability. And giving the boat a health bar makes it feel like we have plenty of control in how this plays out. Carving the QuickTime events out of this fight ups the tension because it feels less like a roller coaster and more like a restrictive, sincere battle. Letting us explore the lake freely after the fact reduces the feeling that this is a gimmick. The boat isn't a one and done, it's a mechanic to consider during our exploration, and a vehicle for our resource and upgrade economy. The lake, just like many other parts of the game, serves as an opportunity to complete side quests and treasure hunts for the merchant. Some of these, like the Scratched Emerald, are simply fetch quests. Others are bounties. Kill a golden knight in the bowels of Castle Salazar. Slay a mutated hound in the village square. What we're doing isn't what's important. The tasks are basic and just an excuse to encourage backtracking. The merchant hates snakes, go and get some snakes. The merchant hates blue medallions, go and shoot some blue medallions. Instead, it's the way the reward economy has changed that's notable. Side quests award one particular type of currency, spinels. Valuable gems that, back in 2005, we would find in their dozens and sell to grab pesetas. Now, the merchant locks important items like treasure maps, crafting recipes, or the increasingly important laser sight behind them. So if we want to really bulk up Leon, the side quests are key. We never learn the merchant's name, but it might as well be Stephen Maug because he's a greedy guzzler for treasure. He buys any old crap, from fish to eggs to weapons and ammo, but the real value is in jewels and gold. You find treasure like crowns and statues separately from gems and jewels. If you combine them, the value of that treasure grows. There's a combination and bonus system here. If you follow certain patterns, like 5 red gemstones, the value increases by a multiplier of 1.9. A trio of colors adds 1.8. This doesn't just incentivize exploration and backtracking, it incentivizes treating the treasure we find as a precious resource. Do you sell the crown now and use the money to buy something shiny, or do you hold on to it and hope you find some more gems to increase the value? A hideous roar echoes in a nearby canyon. Something terrifying lies ahead. So, let's sell what we can and strengthen Leon.
Whoa! God damn, you're a big boy.
Del Lago might be a gimmick boss, but it's just the prelude to a real challenge. El Gigante. Standing at 22 feet tall, he joins Del Lago as a creature that blends the scientific BOW-laden history of Resident Evil with folklore. A giant, a troll with an alien parasite bursting out of its back to remind us that, fantasy implications be damned, this is the product of a bizarre sci-fi experiment. Beings that failed to stabilize after Las Plagas incubated. They didn't just become brainwashed, they became feral mutants. A rearing log reads,
6 months. Its teeth have only just come through, but it shoves everything within reach into its mouth. It can't walk yet, but it swallowed a dog whole. 13 months. It can swing our largest pickaxe as if it were a twig. One of the men in the village was almost eaten today too. It's not getting enough food. 17 months. There are only a few cows left now. At this rate, the whole village will starve.
The village was already suffering from withered crops and dying animals, but in their slavish devotion, the cultists are taking what little cattle they have and feeding them to El Gigante. It shows the ruthlessness of Los Illuminados. The mission comes first, the defenses, the weapons. As a foe, he's ferocious. Just like with Del Lago, quick-time events are gone, only appearing as evasion prompts when it charges and knife prompts. The fight feels fluid in its spectacle. A couple of cabins are dotted around the arena and he'll rip them out of the ground, using walls and roofing to try and crush Leon. A friendly white wolf is our advantage. If the player takes a beat back at the chief's manor, we can save it from a bear trap, and it repays our kindness by coming to our rescue, occasionally distracting El Gigante long enough for us to blast at it. Good thing we upgraded our weapons. What does a shop and upgrade system do to Resident Evil 4's horror? The most impactful thing about an in-game economy is how it relates to player agency. Being able to invest in Leon as a vehicle, we find agency, and agency ups the tension. In an unpredictable and threatening environment like the village, staying in control also reflects the level of protection a player can provide to the player character. Through exploration, we get stronger with yellow herbs. Combining them with the green one increases our maximum health. Poison has been cut, both in 2005 and in 2023. It has dissolved from the series altogether moving forward. A shock and a shame, because every Resident Evil game from 4 onwards has an enemy that seems to exist just to justify blue herbs. In this case, it's the Novistadors. Through the merchant, we're afforded more options and more opportunities to prepare Leon for the dangers ahead in weapon upgrades. Pouring time into the reload speed of a handgun completely changes the dynamic by the time we reach the island. But the uncertainty of what those dangers are, especially in Resident Evil 4 where it's constantly throwing new enemy types and new scenarios at you, means that even though you've got a fully upgraded shotgun, you can never be 100% that you've done enough to prepare for what comes next. Degradation is something to consider when it comes to that economy. The knife and body armor can wear away through use, and we need to pay to repair them or pour that money into strengthening them so they break less often. Agency and decision making is consistently prioritized in these menus. There's a fair argument to be made that crafting and upgradables can evolve the game feel from careful horror experience to a shooty bang bang time, but I've often found that removing the ability to improve the player character often adds to how scripted a game can feel. Even the Umbrella Saga games give you upgrades to find in new weaponry. This is where the survival appears in our survival horror, in giving you options and choice on how you'll survive. The early Resident Evils gave you options on which items to take and when. Resi 4 gives you options on which dimensions Leon prioritizes in survival. This extends to the attaché case too. The inventory is a grid system and the size of each item is now considered. Some are bigger than others, so need to be flipped around. It's all about choice, and the remake enhances it even further by bringing back the storage box, something that was sadly cut from the original game. Back in 2005, the shop system contributed to the decision-making involved in the moment-to-moment gameplay. Ganados would drop health, ammo, and pesetas, but after a short period, those drops would fade away. We'd need to rush over to pick them up before they vanished, but that might put us in the path of enemies. Risk and reward, speed accelerating tension. Leon could survive purely through the loop of killing enemies, picking up the ammo they dropped, and killing them again. It brought chaos and scrappy play. Through just a couple of tweaks, the remake has a very different feeling. The first is that items the Ganados drop don't fade away anymore. Currently, Leon is heading back along this walkway to reach the church. You can see some pesetas sitting on a rooftop. They've been here for about an hour, dropped by villagers that I killed on my first pass through. The second tweak is that Ganados don't drop ammunition or herbs. They strictly drop pesetas and crafting resources, introducing ammo crafting as our primary means of arming ourselves. You can find bullets in barrels and crates, but these don't respawn outside of specific story beats. Returning to the fish farm will show the shattered remains of yellow wood. Ammo crafting is a stress mechanic. Because you're not just picking up ammo willy-nilly, and because the ammo you actually have is hidden behind resources and gunpowder in your inventory, whenever you swap between weapons, it looks like you're emptier than you are. I had a fair few moments where I brought up my weapons with a pit in my stomach thinking, oh god, I've not got much ammo at all, just to open the inventory and feel a cathartic rush of relief as I saw how much gunpowder I had. That wasn't always the case. Remake is different from original in that unless you prioritize just one weapon, you are never drowning in ammunition. That familiar, crawling paranoia that I didn't have enough to get the job done returned at a few points, especially later on the island. Resource management is a staple of this genre, forcing the player to constantly trade between health, ammo, and, in some cases, key items. In Resi 1, this added to the tension of backtracking. You'd need to retrace areas you were familiar with in the mansion, affording the game opportunities to switch up the scares and add new grislies to spaces you initially thought were safe. Resi 4's resource management is more like a survival sim than a classic survival horror.
My name's Leon. I'm here in the President's orders and... That went well.
In the attic of an old church, we find Ashley Graham. Target secured, mission accomplished. But in classic Resident Evil fashion, things aren't that simple. A vision, a transmission from a purple-robed figure throws things into flux. There's a horde of cultists approaching the church, and even with an ally, Leon is very much alone. So, let's wrap up our time in the village by talking about how we survive the hordes. On the BIOHAZARD YouTube channel is a now unlisted video where Shinji Mikami, director of Resident Evil 1 and Resident Evil 4 OG, and Jun Deguchi, director of Resident Evil Village, talk about the series. In it, Mikami says,
"The new camera angle just felt natural. We weren't planning on doing something innovative, we just thought that angle was better."
But the angle was innovative. It's just one of the ways Resi 4 became definitive in the action space. Gears of War would later go on to purposefully emulate that camera, and when Capcom released Lost Planet, developers questioned why they didn't use Resident Evil 4's over-the-shoulder perspective. We've talked before about how things like fixed camera angles and door transitions are just some of the ways Resident Evil can harbor tension. Bringing the horror into an over-the-shoulder or first-person perspective brings its own tricks to capitalize on. With the 2005 game, the tank controls of the Umbrella Saga carried over, as did the stop-and-shoot focus. Leon was restricted in his movement to hone the pace of battles. The action was faster, so the tension came from limiting his response to it. A careful balance was struck to make sure the player didn't get frustrated. For example, Ganados would run at Leon but then slow to a walk when a meter away. It meant the player felt rushed without actually being rushed. In the remake, Leon is more fluid, and with that fluidity comes a challenge and a demand. If Leon is faster and more agile, able to move and fire at the same time, how do you keep the tension without things descending into a full-blown action fest? Our escape from the village brings answers.
Roost, I've secured Baby Eagle.
Copy that. Is she okay?
Affirmative.
Well done, Condor 1. I'll dispatch a chopper ASAP.
For a start, the Ganados are spongier, with wildly varied health bars. That means they never get predictable when considering resource management. This guy might take 3 bullets. This guy might take 6. This piece of shit might take 15. Die, you son of a... The vision cone that was once so reliable now hides enemies, so you can't aim down the sights and just blast anymore. You'll get jumped by a Ganado just out of view. It certainly adds tension, but I think this forgets the importance of making sure a player doesn't get frustrated. Sometimes, getting grabbed by a Ganado will feel cheap, because you just can't see them when it feels like Leon should be able to sense them nearby. It creates a disconnect between the player and the player character that is crucial to avoid in a horror game. Swapping weapons aren't quick fast. We're forced to sit through the animation, and when a monster is spitting in Leon's face, that brings tension. The same goes for actually aiming. It always takes a beat. Ganados also don't slow to a crawl when approaching anymore, though thankfully their attacks are lumbering with wide, telegraphed swings and a jerk backwards before lunging forwards. Hitboxes are also much more precise, something that ups difficulty and keeps the fear, especially when it comes to the cultists swarming around the castle. Their long robes hide the shape of their legs, so you might accidentally shoot between them if you're not careful. Only a couple of weapons get the laser sight, and even then, it's hidden behind spinels and side quests. That means that unless you're relying on specific weapons, there's uncertainty to your aiming and firing. Leon might be able to move, but that movement means the sight blasts open into a void, just like it did in Resident Evil 2 Remake. And while handling is more secure, there's still a sway to be wary of as enemies jitter and spasm out of shot. The reload rate for weapons are also dogshit. And I love it. The power of the weapons is one way to trace growth, but Leon's speed is how I felt him grow as a hero. At the beginning, the rifle and shotgun force us to reload individual shells and rounds. By the closing hours, this all happens quick fast, so it barely interrupts all the blasting. Lending to his status as a professional hero, Leon finishes the game with a full arsenal of weaponry that makes Kendo's gun shop look like a kiosk. Incendiary grenades have strangely been cut, but aside from that, there are 17 guns in total, not including knives and premium weapons locked behind New Game Plus. Most come with different strengths and weaknesses, eked out across the campaign, so you're encouraged to sincerely consider what weapons suit you best. The Striker shotgun, for example, can eviscerate monsters, but you need to get a lot closer than other shotguns for maximum impact. The Punisher handgun packs a punch, but its fire rate is slower than, say, the Blacktail, a smaller handgun that takes up less space in your inventory. 3 of those weapons are automatic weapons. The TMP submachine gun is carried over from the original game, but thankfully, the remake sits on this incredibly overpowered weapon for a little bit longer. In 2005, you got it just before the canyon fight. Now you get it after returning to the village square. The LE5 is saved until the island, locked behind a power calibration puzzle. It's effectively just a better version of the TMP, but you can attach the biosensor scope to it. What that means is it kills that all-important interval between shots when fighting the regenerators. This weapon quite literally makes the scariest monster in Resident Evil 4 less scary because they're easier to kill with it. Into the storage box you go. The Cobra is a full-blown assault rifle that frankly proves my point about automatic weapons in horror games, because the remake doesn't seem to know what to do with it. It doesn't use the same ammunition as the TMP or the LE5. Instead, you need to load it with the much more rare rifle ammo. This ammo is rare because it's not supposed to be for standing still and holding the trigger. It's for slow fire rates and sniping. What that means is the Cobra chews through precious ammunition and is basically useless as an assault rifle. For all the love I carry for Resident Evil 4 and its remake, I would carry more love if the automatic weapons were cut altogether. I know, I'm in the minority there and I'm happy to own that, but the TMP is simply too reliable, so by the halfway point, fights turn into a breeze if you rely on it. That's mainly because of how much ammunition it can carry. Spending one of our 6 shotgun shells on a red barrel is more of a consideration than spending one of our 150 submachine gun bullets. The bolt thrower is a brand new weapon with good intentions. It's meant to be treated as a stealth option because of its silent range, but the range is where it falters. Bolts don't do much damage, and the drop-off is punishing, so realistically, it's too risky to use with very little reward. Much like with Resident Evil 3 Remake, the mine thrower has been cut as a weapon altogether and merged with something else. There, mines were part of the grenade launcher. Here, they can be attached to bolts. It's a secondary explosive ammunition that forces us to use knives or a mountain of gunpowder to craft, and again, the reward isn't worth the risk. A mine bolt does 5 times the damage of a normal bolt, but a normal bolt does hardly any damage. That's simply not enough when those precious crafting resources can go into grenades, shotgun shells, or precious knives. Who would have thought that poor, infected Marvin Branagh would serve as the inspiration for Leon's go-to weapon? He brings the knife the dying detective gifted him back in Resident Evil 2 into Resident Evil 4. In a hostile environment where he isn't sure who to trust, the knife is his only source of comfort. Speaking to Gamer Braves, the lead producer Yoshiaki Hidebayashi said,
"The parry system actually came from experimenting with the Krauser fight, and exploring how to translate that scene into engaging gameplay. We felt it was a good fit for the game's basic combat system as well, so we implemented it into the rest of the game."
The knife system is a stroke of genius for 4 reasons. The first is that by bringing a parry system into Resident Evil 4, it encourages getting up close and personal with the Ganados. If you can time it against the swing of an axe or scythe, our monsters will be momentarily stunned, so it hypes tension and feeling like you're overwhelmed by the sheer numbers of the cult, painting them as a force of nature. It also brings the weird and the silly to gameplay. Resident Evil 4's campy tone was once conveyed through one-liners, villain monologues, and insane beats like Robo Salazar. Now it's part of the moment-to-moment action. Parrying a chainsaw is ludicrous, but it's no more ludicrous than half the superheroic feats Leon once pulled off in 2005. It just makes the silly strategic for the player. The second way is in how it brings stealth into the mix. Leon can now crouch freely and circle around enemies, so you can thin their numbers before a combat arena truly kicks off. I've seen criticisms that stealth isn't always a viable option in the game, but I think those criticisms miss the point. In sections like the village square, a true stealth approach is not viable because of where some Ganados are positioned. That's a smart choice, because the importance of this moment is how quickly the houses and grounds swarm with bad guys. If you could sneak your way through it, you wouldn't get the initial thrill and fear that comes with being overwhelmed so early on. What stealth is an opportunity to play with pacing. When Leon loses his gear in the factory, we're forced into it. When he reaches the windmill, we can cut through the farm quickly if we're careful not to be spotted. Later, when the red-robed priests appear and can stun us, it's crucial we don't end up in their eye line. Stealth helps appease that. The third way is how knives tie into where we aim, where our position is, and when we shoot. Sometimes, if you blast a Ganado in the legs, he'll spin around and drop to his knees, exposing a juicy, delicious neck for us to stab at for a quick, decisive kill. Other times, the Ganado won't spin around, but he will drop, so you can sacrifice your position to run behind him and execute him anyway. You give up ground, you get in the midst of monsters, just to save a few more bullets and make sure he's dead. By this point in our adventure, with Ashley at our heels, some of the Ganados' heads will burst open into a glorious, gory mess of tentacles and suspended eyeballs. These monsters are deadly, with sharp blades that whip out in front of them, so you want to try and avoid this at any cost. The way to do that is to spot a villager writhing around on the floor and race over to slit their throat, stopping the transformation. When you do knock a Ganado to his knees, words like suplex and kick aren't big flashy button prompts anymore that give combat an arcadey feel. These were fun and flashy in 2005, and I wouldn't change them for the world considering the tone of that game, but the remake is more comfortable establishing a grim ambience. Making our prompts small and blunt, simply stating melee or evade harnesses that. Yoshiaki Hidebayashi said,
"An important element of the game is the tension, release, and catharsis. The melee actions work in that way. They can take enemies down in a very satisfying way that suits this catharsis. We do view that their actions, the roundhouse kicks and the suplexes, suit the major theme that this game has."
If you do whack a monster and kick them into a wall or furniture, it does double damage. They snap their necks or flatten against stone. That means in the moment you're encouraged to think tactically about where you are in a space and if you can lure a Ganado close to something that would finish them off faster. What were we talking about? Oh yeah, the knife. The fourth way that the knife is awesome is how it ties back to the game's economy. It sits at the apex where combat, exploration, and resource management meet. It's not just for stealth or parrying, it's for quick escapes as well, just like it was back in Resident Evil 2. With every stealth kill, every parry, and every time we jab a Ganado in the neck to get away, it degrades, eventually breaking. Executions and stealth become a resource to be managed. Do I want to try and stealth my way through this section? My knife's about to break and I might need it if something grabs me. When Leon and Ashley make it to a cabin on the outskirts of the village, their resources are starting to run dry, and as a storm thunders outside, things are about to get a lot worse.
You.
Hey, listen, about earlier...
Yeah, about that.
Hey, I see you found your missing señorita.
Señorita has a name and it's Ashley. You are?
Name's Luis. Encantado.
Great. We all have names. Now then, who are you? And what are you doing here?
Leon's distrust of Luis bursts when we meet him in the cabin, especially when he tries to flirt with Ashley. He demands answers, determined not to be tricked again by a potential ally. But before Luis can bear them, they're interrupted. Cue the famous cabin fight. It's not the first time the game's overwhelmed us, and it certainly won't be the last, though thankfully there are variables to consider that help. Cabinets that block windows, a set of wooden planks on the table let us choose which of the remaining entry points we can board up. It's a nice way of flashing Leon back to the days of wooden planks in the RPD, and gives the player that all-important agency that gets dashed later. The second floor has a staircase, but a ladder and drop-down point let us turn the cabin into something more circular in its design, with ways to push through being cornered. The cabin isn't the only example of how versatile Resident Evil 4's combat was and is. Fighting with Luis as an ally not once but twice, here and later in the mine, adds a lot to our bonding with him and making a fight feel different. The catapults in the castle draw our attention to finding vantage points. The laser turrets on the island force us to find our way through a maze of concrete bunkers to reposition them. And of course, who can forget protecting Ashley with the wrecking ball, a sequence we can quickly overcome if we packed a rocket launcher and a couple of grenades. There's an attempt to make almost every fight feel distinct and unique, either in situation or level design. Defending Ashley from Ganados as she turns a crank in the castle, being chased by Chief Mendez as we blast through a queue of villagers waiting patiently to chew our face off, scuttling around the ballroom while a hive of monsters buzz and burst out of hiding places. The maze, the minecart ride. I could go on and on and on, but if I did, I'd just be recounting practically every space in Resident Evil 4. If an environment seems basic, like the village square or a wooden fort, there's still variables to consider. Sometimes that's as simple as verticality, or how levels trick us into getting stuck in corners. Other times it's red barrels or jars full of gasoline that you can group Ganados around. Later in the castle, we can drop a chandelier by sneaking up to a lever. Stealth is given purpose and payoff.
Ashley, is this the first time you've coughed up blood like this?
You want to start explaining?
The cough, the blood, is caused by something called plaga.
Las Plagas, the parasite that dominates Resident Evil 4, is slowly twisting Leon and Ashley. Luis knows all about it. In fact, he was infected himself and was able to cut it out of his body with a surgical procedure. It's not a simple job, but it's our only chance. He leaves us with more questions and answers, and a promise that he'll help us. Kinda wish he stuck around. There's a legion of monsters between here and the end of the chapter. Speaking to Game Informer, the game director, Kazui Kadui, talked about enemy approach. Quote,
to make sure there would be a factor of strategizing around whether you see an enemy first, or if an enemy sees you first and starts attacking. We make it so oftentimes the enemy starts in a state where they aren't aware of the player. Enemy behaviors have changed a bit.
No matter which version you're playing, enemies blend into the darkness, the shading, and the color palette, so during certain moments, like at night, an awareness of our surroundings is key. Who strikes first is key. Everything changes once a Ganado sees us, because they'll call for help or, in later parts, try to flank us. They're intelligent, but not so intelligent that you forget they're monsters. For example, the traps can be used to our advantage. Ganados are so mindless that they'll wander into their own trip mines or get caught in bear traps. If that happens, you can kick them and their leg will rip off as they fly back. Glorious, gross carnage. Just because the Ganados are all humanoid doesn't mean they all demand the same approach. Disarming them is key to getting the upper hand. Some of them bring unique mechanics, like sticks of dynamite that we can shoot to blow them and some of their allies up. or Molotov cocktails that can set them ablaze. Because Leon's infected with the Plaga, red-robed priests can exploit that, making it a part of the game design as well as a narrative design. Those priests could control the parasite inside us and stun Leon. Ranged enemies, like those wielding crossbows, are overdone. There are simply too many of them to feel special, and their threats are kept at a distance so they don't feel as present as a farmer drooling down our neck with a pitchfork in hand. Especially by the time we get to the island, a lot of the combat loses its horror luster, and I will get to that, but in the village and the castle, big fights, even when they're spectacular, feel like survival horror. It's just the survival is more frenetic. Unfortunately, Chief Mendez is an exception to that.
Oh, Almighty, grant me the strength to crush your enemies. Son of a bitch! Ashley, run!
After an ominous, pulsing build-up, Chief Mendez finally loses patience. He's not going to wait for the Plaga to finish incubating. Leon has caused too much damage, and the punishment that waits the village if we make it to the castle is too grave to ignore. In an abandoned barn, he attacks. As a boss, he's fine. It's glorious to see how gross his design is in the RE engine because it was always a terrifying, scuttly design. A spine that stretches and creaks, making a man that always towered over us stand even taller. In 2005, the full barn was offered up as an arena, letting us climb up to the second floor and skirt around him. Mendez was constantly on us, meaning the pressure was never ending and the need to put distance between us and him added to the fear. Gameplay emulated feeling. In the remake, he's simply easier, less present, and the arena is smaller. We can no longer circle around on the second floor balcony. His first phase is the most faithful, but it's over in just a few shots, and after that, he hangs around on the other side of the barn tossing bits of wood at Leon. The way his eye is used is also different, in a way that I think hampers the feeling of Resident Evil 4 as a story. In the original, we had to use it to unlock a retinal scanner, a bizarre early hint that the cult was more high-tech than we've been led to believe. The barn, farmyard, windmill, and rickety wooden fortresses started to bleed away, like the illusion was breaking the further we pushed on, eventually becoming clear when we get to the island and see it's a whole military complex. In the remake, the eye is now just a piece of treasure, not a key.
What's going on?
Well, at least we don't have to worry about being followed.
Thankfully, Castle Salazar is just over the ridge. It is the best act of the game. What does this picture smell like to you? How about this one? Or this? One of the reasons why I think I'm so enamored by good visceral horror is because I have olfactory synesthesia. When I see something in a game like a gooey corpse, a dying farm, or burning barn, I can smell it. The village that makes up the first third of Resident Evil 4 smells like an old book. You know the smell, that musk that comes when the linen on wood-based paper breaks down and puffs out that stink of vanilla and mold. But if that's what I get from this picture, and this one, what does Castle Salazar smell like? Take a deep breath. I smell a painting.
Hola, Luis here. You guys still around?
Well, I wanted to go home, but Ashley just had to see this castle first.
Perfect, because I have a present I want to give you. Medicine that will help to suppress the progress of your problem.
Luis has beaten us here. The drawbridge closes behind us, trapping Leon and Ashley into our second act and forcing them to journey deeper into the decorated halls of Castle Salazar. Luis says he has a present for us. We just have to reach him. The castle is magical. It pulls off the impossible by simultaneously feeling like an extension of the village a mile away and an isolated commune that never associates with it. Interestingly, the development team were split into 3 groups, one for the village, one for the castle, and one for the island, so that each act would feel distinct. In 2005, it would whirl from terrifying to wacky to emulating parts of Bowser's Castle from Super Mario. Just look at this. We go from a Baroque style with references to real-life architecture to a whole lava pit in the basement where we need to contend with stone dragons breathing fire. Where am I? It climbs up to the stars and descends into pits. It concludes at the top of a great marble tower, and its midpoint takes us into sewers that lead to a mine that leads to an ancient tomb. The highest of highs and the lowest of lows connected to heaven and hell so fervently that it's no wonder Los Illuminados has set up shop here. It's a fortress built for zealots, its class hierarchy manifest. Most importantly of all, it brings the Gothicism to Resident Evil 4, and it stinks of paint. In 2023, the decadence is the focus and the wildness has been contextualized. The lava obstacle course has sadly been cut, as has the tomb of Salazar's ancestors with the booby traps and wriggling new breed of plaga dashing through sand. It's a different angle on what greeted us in 2005, and it's defined by its lord and master, Ramon Salazar.
Mr. Kennedy, Mr. Kennedy. How novel. Nonetheless, you see, the girl must be ours. With a girl as the very source, your United States and then the entire world shall overflow with his grace.
Ramon is expecting us. With a scratched voice and flourishing hands, he welcomes Leon and Ashley to his home and, despite being fully aware that his job is to capture us, decides to have some fun. He is a tiny, titanous monster, a gleefully malicious sadist. In the pantheon of Resident Evil villains, he is iconic because of how irritating he is. He's a character who makes Alfred Ashford look like a serious man.
I am Alfred Ashford!
Alfred is not a serious man. Aristocracy makes for an easy villain because, societally, it preys on a lack of fairness and wealth inequality. Aristocrats intrinsically suck, so making a bad guy a lord or lady of the house sets up a villain to be deliciously hateable. It's something Resident Evil understands all too well and has returned to a few times. The Ashfords, Salazar, Dimitrescu. Despite the stature of a 10-year-old and the face of a 90-year-old, he is in fact only 20. His face is powdered white like Castellan's of old, a crude attempt to cover up the plaga slithering under his cracked, dusty skin and an illness that almost took his life. It was his mother who opened the door to infection by the parasite in an attempt to save him. Dried blood and popping veins can be seen around his collar. His mockery is what makes him stand out. He regularly croons over an old-fashioned speaker system planted around the castle, there so he can bark orders at the cultists or yell at Leon. With those speakers, there's an opportunity for the player to organically recreate a brilliant moment from the past. Back in 2005, Leon shot the speaker and it gave Ramon a fright. In the remake, if we shoot the speakers, Ramon just cackles. We don't get to see him flinch, and his laughter just makes us hate him even more.
Are you ready to hand over the girl?
Not this guy again.
He might be 20, but Ramon has the mind of a child. He's petulant and petty, seeing the world through old stories and plays. He constantly refers to Leon as a gallant knight, and muses on how this story will be told after our death. Much like how Chief Irons characterized the RPD and Oswald Spencer characterized the mansion, the castle is characterized by Salazar's presence. Rooms like the famous water chamber where Leon had to protect Ashley while she turned some cranks have now been given purpose through detail. The chamber is now a lavish tomb, full of stone coffins, black water, and memorials. The history of his family explains the wildness of the castle's design. Over decades, it's mutated and evolved into the vast, complex space we need to work through. A family chronology lays out the architectural history.
Count Gregorio, the architect. Driven by irrational paranoia, Gregorio squandered his vast fortune on excessive castle defences and strange, elaborate contraptions. Count Alejandro, the lavish. Playful at heart, Alejandro had a courtyard and ballroom erected before his untimely death.
Long before the time of George Trevor, Resident Evil's world flowed with insane fanaticism and disruptive architecture. The traps and trials, the old-fashioned catapults are explained by Gregorio. The winding maze and ostentatious decor came from Alejandro. The sealed mine underneath was because of Count Hippolito. The cult's domination of the castle's chambers are because of Ramon. The first thing we see upon entering the castle is a cultist at an altar. Gloomy, fire-cast rooms show corpses frozen in rapture around statues and talismans dedicated to Los Illuminados. Salazar's crest appears on ragged flags and tattered banners. The symbols of Los Illuminados are kept clean and unmarked. Inside the castle entrance, bizarre chandeliers dangle with humongous statues of saints, a sign of disrespect. The Catholic faith from before has been captured, chained, and thrown upside down. Bodies hang from winding staircases. This could be to show how ruthless the cult are when it comes to anyone who steps out of line, but considering the ritualistic positioning of bodies elsewhere, perhaps they were willing sacrifices. It's all so much, so obnoxious, so over-designed that it paints the Salazars as frivolous in their wealth, segregated from the village they were supposed to protect. A luxurious automatic carriage acts as fast travel from one end to the other. A golden cable car takes us to the clock tower. We later learn that an aqueduct and waterway lives under the castle, something that definitely would have helped the villagers fight back the famine, but it's all been blocked off. The village suffers from poor living conditions and societal regression. By contrast, the castle is cozy. Salazar doesn't care about the peasants below. Notably, the villagers don't chase us to the castle like they did in 2005. It seems that Chief Mendez's fear of the Castellan has spread to his flock. They're right to be terrified. To further highlight Ramon's sadism, torture is the theme of Act 2, sitting snugly next to the gorgeous aristocratic design. A dungeon and chamber show his cruelty from the off, with bodies carved up with phrases like "none shall escape." Torture devices appear throughout the castle, not just here, and even when the furniture is perfectly innocent, it's been designed with sharp geometry and spiked spokes to hide that innocence. This is just a printing press, but it looks like a rack.
Instead of worrying about her, worry about your own skin. Foolish little lamb.
The castle's level design flows like a tide, bringing us into tight, carpeted corridors and wide, spacious chambers. But when we get outside and feel the quiet descend, it breeds paranoia, the same way that the village did. Narratively, that paranoia is deserved. It's not just cultists and traps we need to be aware of. It's the ticking time bomb growing inside Leon and Ashley. In the cold night air, Sadler reaches out and touches the power site in Ashley. He tries to control her, make her kill Leon. Ashley fleeing from us here is more effective and less random and annoying than it was in 2005. There, she coughed up some blood, freaked out, and because she was ashamed, she ran straight into one of the castle's many traps. Bye, Ashley. In the remake, we see her resolve because she fights back, resorting to place the knife to her throat to save her rescuer. She knows how valuable she is to the cult. They want the power site to finish incubation and send her back to the United States. If Ashley is infected, the president would soon follow. But Leon is once again alone, and we've got some puzzles to solve before we're reunited. One of the things that is so impressive about the level design here is that it feels like one big puzzle. The hedge maze is just one example, but on the whole, Salazar's castle has insane contraptions that force us to treat the space like a riddle to be deciphered, rather than just brute force our way through. Doors are locked behind clanging gongs. We need to shoot particular ones to open the way. Later in the tower, we get locked in a vertical maze full of sun and moon levers that open alternating gates while cultists snap at our heels. While keys play a role in our exploration, their importance has been lessened compared to the Umbrella Saga games because, while backtracking has more influence in the remake, it's still not the core of the design philosophy. There's one point later on where Leon needs to find parts of an emblem and combine them to proceed. A part of the castle opens up and we can go wherever we like in whatever order we like to find what we need, but mandatory sections like that are rare. Typically, the formula will be that we enter a space, see a puzzle to be solved, and solve the puzzle there and then. Puzzles weren't much of a focus back in the original, but they were still there. In the castle, we needed to swap gruesome, macabre paintings depicting death until there were only 6 corpses. The chief's house forced us to rotate the Los Illuminados insignia to open a door. The church made us rotate some lights to form the insignia on a stained glass window. The graveyard made us use gravestones as a guide to find the right cult symbols. In fact, a lot of the puzzles, both then and now, come back to the cult's iconography to give them purpose and meaning. The insignia puzzle is still there in the chief's manor, but a wardrobe has a bespoke, patterned lock that forces us to read the cult's Bible. Much like with Resident Evil 2 Remake, the puzzles here are generally more involved. The stained glass puzzle makes us retrieve a blue dial first, and the pattern is a bit more obscure. A huge metal door makes us find an eagle medal, manually turn it so it fits into the slot, and then it becomes a lever. There are minute stages to consider. Jumping back to the castle, take the sword puzzle. In 2005, we needed to swap 2 swords in molds in the wall. Ooh, I wonder where they are. Right next to each other. Hardly a head scratcher, is it? In the remake, there are 4 swords, and we need to follow the story of a knight, Ramon Salazar's ancestor, Gregorio. One of the swords is eerily bloodied, embedded in the sculpture of a gigantic dead cultist. We need to piece it together ourselves.
This artwork doesn't look like it's telling some kind
Oh,
of
shut up, Ashley, you're spoiling it. The same goes for the dining table. The wine bottle we shoot to open a door has been swapped with a full, complex dining room scene set up like interactive theatre. We need to study the paintings on a wall and sit at the spot that recreates the scene. It's bizarre and isn't solved through gun, rather taking a beat, a deep breath, and soaking in a space. If you're like me and love puzzles and survival horror games, there are plenty of optional ones to sink our teeth into. The castle way shrines are treated differently from the village. They're mini puzzles that don't use a key but a puzzle cube. We need to line the cube up for each one so it fits that specific pattern. The Cobra assault rifle is hidden behind a secret painting that's unlocked with that cube. This also extends out to the island as well, making it feel less action-packed and more like an extension of the design philosophy elsewhere. I still don't think it strikes the right balance, and we'll talk about the island later, but the lab with the regenerators feels denser because of the power puzzles we need to solve while dealing with them. Scenarios are conjured where monsters and riddles work in tandem. Though time unfortunately still stands still when solving them, so the tension gets cracked unnecessarily.
You can stop right there, Leon. Wouldn't make me use this, would you?
Ada Wong reappears, a ghost from the past. Despite the game teasing her involvement back in the Chief's manor and then outright spoiling it far too early in a scene with Luis, seeing the agent and the spy together still has weight. They flirt through hand-to-hand combat, Leon proving how much he's grown by besting her. Resentfulness is cast over the scene like a shadow. Back in Resident Evil 2, Ada betrayed Leon, faked her death, and for years has let him believe that she died. Her appearance isn't a surprise to him. It's implied he heard whispers that she was alive, but it still hurts. For years, she's been part of his trauma, believing he failed to save her. That moment when she fell into the abyss has fully formed into survivor's guilt, the reason he feels emotionally involved in saving Ashley. This isn't just a mission to him, it's a chance to make amends. Leave the girl, Ada says. She's lost no matter what. Leon's refusal to heed her pessimism is what makes him a hero. It isn't long before Leon finds Ashley again.
I'm so scared. When that happened, I wasn't myself anymore.
She shivers to herself in a bedroom that's far too big, telling Leon to stay back. The weight of the Plagas, of what she might become, is starting to get to her. She's cracking under the terror, bringing Resident Evil's central horror concept to the forefront. It's not just about turning into a monster, it's about losing your sense of self. About an other changing the way you see the world. Let's take a breather here, let Ashley calm herself, and let me tell you a story. It's a story about knights of hardened faith, betrayal, and fear of the outside world. It's the story of the Enlightened Ones, Los Illuminados.
When day breaks, you too will join our covenant to share in my holy blessing.
Like all good horror, the origins of Los Illuminados are muddy and twisted, reaching into real-world parallels to make their fiction hit harder. The cult is old, really old, older than anyone in the castle, older than anyone in the village. Beneath the surface of Osmond Sadler's sermons lies something deeper, a blood feud spanning centuries, and a personal obsession that has warped a man's soul. The parasite at the heart of it all, Las Plagas, is the creepiest cause of infection in the whole series, not just because it's so scuttly and insect-like, but because of what it means. A parasite that puts you under someone else's control, that turns you into a religious zealot. If you think you couldn't be brainwashed into something terrible, truly terrible, here's something that banishes that feeling. For Los Illuminados, the parasite was the foundation of their power. Not just a means of control, but a divine weapon, proof of something greater, a holy infection. Enter Gregorio Salazar, Ramon's great-great-great-great-grandfather. It was the time of the Spanish Inquisition, when Spain's Catholic rulers punished heresy and, notably, started targeting Jewish and Muslim populations. Gregorio led a military campaign against Los Illuminados and wiped out the cult, executing many of its members and banishing the rest. He became a feudal lord, laying down roots, overseeing the protection of Catholic converts and suppressing any whisper of Los Illuminados. Survivors were driven into exile, scattered across Spain and banished to a nearby island. Among them were Sadler's ancestors, names etched into stone. Hester, Adam. For centuries, the Salazars kept the parasite buried beneath their land, under lock and key. For a long time, the cult was silent, forgotten. The first instance of outsiders. Another, coming into your land and destroying everything you hold dear. One epitaph from 1741 lays bare their bitterness.
Expelled by the militant wicked, we find ourselves in exile. Withered is the grass, barren are the trees. We wait in expiation, this isolated island our purgatory. Yet despair not, brothers and sisters. Our time shall come.
For generations, the Sadlers bided their time, steeped in resentment and vowing vengeance. Osmond Sadler wasn't just another cult leader, he was born into this legacy of defeat and humiliation. When he returned to Valdalobos in the early 2000s, it wasn't just religious fervor that drove him, it was the culmination of a long-simmering vendetta against the Salazars and the villagers who'd cast out his people. As a villain, Sadler's psychology is fascinating because it fuses megalomania with an almost pathological need to vindicate his bloodline. On paper, he was a healer, offering to treat the ailing Ramon Salazar. In truth, he saw an opportunity to resurrect both the Plaga and his family's lost power. Ramon, sickly and desperate, was the perfect pawn. Sadler saved him by infecting him with a dominant species of Plaga, turning him into both disciple and puppet. Ramon's guilt over his family's historical persecution of the cult became Sadler's lever, driving him to open the sealed caverns beneath the castle. It's worth remembering that Sadler's influence wasn't limited to manipulating one boy. His great masterstroke was converting Father Betores Mendez, a man who once cared for his community and was himself a Catholic priest. Mendez opened the village to the outside world, trying to build a factory and push his community into the future. They were rewarded with a stranger at their door and conversion in the form of a psychological coup. Mendez inadvertently handed Sadler the entire community in one fell swoop. Through the chief's authority, villagers were cleansed with Plaga eggs, sold the idea that infection would absolve their ancestral sins. The cult's holy book is soaked in this narrative of guilt and redemption, clearly designed to stir deep-rooted shame. Sadler's obsession with redemption in the body as a vessel for atonement is starkly illustrated in an excerpt from his holy book, something I fully believe he himself wrote. The writing sounds like Sadler's voice, poetic but manipulative, wrapping sacrifice and suffering in a sheen of devotion. His writing turns horror into duty and demands payment for ancient wrongs. This isn't just religious scripture, it's propaganda, laying out a blueprint for how to view human life, expendable, farmed, and valued only for what it can give back to the collective. Sadler's vision of faith is transactional, mechanized. People are livestock, parasites are blessings. The body is just a seatbed. What's chilling is how he weaves utopia into his sermons. The promise of paradise on earth, of universal love, is spelled out in bright, hypnotic strokes.
Praise be to the holy insects, we have been promised paradise on earth. Man, woman or child, his love does not discriminate. Beast, fish or bird, all creatures shall be equally blessed.
To his followers this sounds like salvation, but the true horror is buried in the fine print. Paradise isn't peace, it's assimilation. The cult doesn't want worshippers, it wants vessels. Where Sadler's psychology gets truly unhinged is in how he aligns the personal with the prophetic. He doesn't just want revenge or religious dominance, he sees the two as one and the same. His text is drenched in apocalyptic imagery, calling on his followers to repay the ancient sins of their forebears.
Sacrifice your life and the blood of your enemy, atone for your ancient sins.
Sadler's genius is how he welds history, guilt, and biology into a single dogma. Every follower is trapped by the past. Every infection is spun as a gift. Every death is painted as divine justice. His speeches and writings repeatedly frame the cult's mission as a correction of history, not just a conquest, but a balancing of the scales. That's why his manipulation of Ramon Salazar hits so hard. It's not just political, it's deeply personal. Sadler makes Ramon carry the burden of his ancestors' crimes, pushing him to turn the castle into a shrine for the cult. He weaponizes shame just as much as he weaponizes the parasite. The ancient epitaphs left behind by Sadler's ancestors reflect this fixation on suffering and rebirth. One fragment from 1827 reads,
"The bones of our brethren rest in all nations. The blood of our brethren provides all food. We die only to be reborn. We live on through eternity. We reign absolute."
It's no stretch to say Sadler internalized this mantra. His cult wasn't just a bid for power, it was the fulfillment of a prophecy written in his own bloodline. When he stood at the pulpit barking orders and chanting about paradise, he wasn't just a leader. He was a man possessed by his ancestors' vision, convinced that his success would bring closure to centuries of exile. What's so powerful about all of this, about Los Illuminados as a villainous sect, is that it's so dense in its storytelling. Everything I've told you here is pieced together through optional collectibles, family histories, and excerpts from Sadler's Bible. To compare the history of Resident Evil 4's monsters to, say, the history of Resident Evil Village's monsters is like putting an encyclopedia next to a nursery rhyme. With Village, I would argue that's frustrating but on purpose, but the wealth of information we get in the remake is astounding. What do you think, Ashley? Feel better?
Leon. Thanks.
Doesn't matter, Luis is waiting for us in the Great Hall. Let's keep going. Teaming up with Ashley Graham shifts the game feel, especially when it comes to combat. I was barely able to look after myself, now I've got to protect someone? She changes the pace of fights because you need to be more careful with your aim. If you shoot her, it's all over. If she gets kidnapped by the Ganados, it's all over. Previously, you could quickly justify taking a grenade or blasting a red barrel even if Leon's a little close and will take damage. With Ashley, we have to consider someone else. Genevieve Buckner, who plays Ashley, didn't do a lot of interviews around Resident Evil 4's release, but she did join Nicole Tompkins from Resident Evil 3 Remake when she streamed the game. On that stream, she said,
I felt really lucky because they changed Ashley so much in the remake. It meant I didn't have to live up to what came before.
Ashley's more demure in this game. She still doubts Leon, she still questions, especially in the first half, so we can pave a path for her arc. The first time we tell her to hide in a locker, she turns her nose up at the idea, but by the end of the game, she immediately does what Leon tells her because she trusts him. Thankfully, she isn't scared of ladders anymore, so Leon doesn't need to hang around at the bottom of drops to catch her. She's treated as more self-sufficient. There's banter between Leon and Ashley in gameplay. She's not just a silent follower now that yells in a voice so shrill that it makes the player more annoyed at her than the monsters trying to snatch her. She mutters that she's going to catch a cold if you stay in the rain for too long. She teases Leon's goofier side. Frustratingly, she spoils some puzzles by chiming in with answers too quickly, but that doesn't stop her from being likable. It's important that we find her personable, not just because she is the mission and thus the game, but because Leon is a confident horror protagonist lost in ever-elevating horror scenarios. Ashley's response to the monsters reminds us just how terrifying all this is when you can't do suplexes or parry chainsaws. Neither the remake or the original gets Ashley 100% right when escorting her, but there are pros and cons to how each game approaches it. Back in 2005, she had her own health bar that, if we wanted, could be increased using yellow herbs. In 2023, that health bar is gone. She'll die in 2 hits. You don't have agency over her health. The way we order her around is different now too. Follow and wait have turned into follow closely and follow less closely. It does mean that she doesn't have cement blocks on her feet anymore, even when monsters approach, but it also makes her less reliable when trying to position her during fights. Particularly during the catapult section, the fact Ashley always follows Leon just from various distances makes it much tougher than it needs to be. There's a very, very high risk of her catching some stray debris when missiles explode nearby. Hiding has also been reduced, treated as something more contextual than it ever was in 2005. Back then, you could stuff her in a dumpster while Ganados attacked, giving us more freedom to blast through the hordes without worrying about her. Now, the risk of Ashley getting hurt is a lot more present because she only hides a couple of times. It keeps the tension when escorting her, and her revised AI means she never becomes a nuisance, but I definitely missed the dumpsters. Get in the bin, Ashley. When it comes to exploration, Ashley is now treated like a Metroidvania-esque tool for backtracking, so escorting her doesn't feel like a ball and chain. In some cases, it's quite liberating. We can use her to piggyback up the Chief's ladder, affording a yellow herb for our trouble and insight into Mendez. She scurries through small gaps and crevices to unlock doors. Some of these places are telegraphed early, like later on the island, so it helps guide our hand when moving on. I can't go this way, so I'll follow the corridor round. But playing as her brings a very different kind of feeling.
Leon?
Ashley, are you okay?
Hang on. I'll figure something out.
Further into the castle, Leon gets trapped in a gilded cage, and Ashley escapes into a nearby library. It's a drastic mood shift. Suits of armor come wailing out of the dark as we creep through, solving puzzles as we go. Because of the darkness and the emphasis on a blue lantern that freezes the nights, the pace completely resets, reminding us how terrifying Salazar's castle is when we can't fight back. They shudder and creak as soon as the torch moves off of them, jittering alive violently, and the lantern only works when we're relatively close. That means there are numerous points where we need to slowly, carefully circle around a knight while focusing on them, unable to see any others clanking around behind us. The torch doesn't shine as far ahead as Leon's flashlight does, so sound is our greatest asset. And our greatest enemy. A set of keys let us unlock chests, but we need to rifle through them to figure out which one corresponds with which lock. Unfortunately, tension is dampened because, again, time freezes. You can just brute force these by shuffling through each key, and it doesn't quite bring the feeling of fumbling through your keys while something pursues you.
Can you make it down? I can catch you.
Yeah, I think so.
Ashley frees Leon, but relief doesn't last long. Salazar's right hand appears and, with a flash, kidnaps her again. There's a complaint I've seen regarding how Ashley is handled structurally. The claim goes that she gets captured a lot across the story, even after Leon first rescues her. But I don't think that undermines her as a character. She's not a reliable ally like Louis is when we fight alongside him, because she is the victim here. Despite her status as a damsel in distress in the original, Capcom thankfully didn't overcompensate. There's nothing wrong with having a hostage be terrified and helpless. I think I'd be just like Ashley if I was grabbed by a cult. She epitomizes the fact that hurt people don't have to hurt people. She takes her beatings, torture, and trauma, and rather than wallow in it or let it twist her, she turns it into fuel. She's inspired by Leon to one day be just like him. Later on the island, she wonders wistfully about becoming an agent. It's partly a romantic fantasy, but there's an opportunity for Capcom to cast it in iron in a future game. Give us Agent Graham, guys, come on. Resi 4 would also be a much more exhausting game if Ashley was with us the whole time. It doesn't matter how charming her dialogue is, every section where we're escorting her is more complex and more difficult because of how she changes fights. Her inclusion is great for the overall pacing, but Resident Evil 4 is a long game, and when it comes to the monsters, she kills that all-important sense of isolation. So, as Leon follows her trail, descending into the depths of the castle, let's finally turn our attention to those monsters. In the closing hours of the game, we find a note in the abandoned laboratory at the center of a mysterious island. It's the most Resident Evil note ever written.
April 9th. At last I've created new life. I call it Regenerador. April 13th. I shared the news of my achievement with that pretentious bastard colleague of mine. His face went white. Then, he started scribbling something in his notebook. I thought he'd be impressed, but instead, he actually had the nerve to warn me of the so-called dangers. He's a fool. I have everything under control. Sometime later, the subject went wild and escaped from his cryogenic tank. I was the real fool.
It represents the sick joy that have formed Resident Evil 4's monsters. There's a wealth of creatures to blast through, with alternating species and biologies and tactical approaches.
Leon, changed your mind yet?
Ada?
Assuming you haven't, I've got a tip for you.
Ada calls in with a tip. It seems Salazar has taken Ashley to the throne room. But to reach her, we've got to wade through a compendium of creeps, crawlies, and cultists. Where are the children? The village is populated by ganados of all ages, but where are the kids, the toddlers, the babies? The gameplay answer is that before the Ethan Winters arc, Resident Evil refused to go that dark. The tragedy of the Raccoon City orphanage was found in diary entries and environmental storytelling, but the games never force us to kill mutated rabid children because that was a line the series didn't want to cross. And that's fair enough, it's not a criticism, but if you're like me, you might be surprised to know that there is in fact an answer to that question. Where are the children? Biohazard 4 Incubate is the diary of a villager that was released alongside some special Japanese editions of the original game. If we translate that diary, we see from a villager's perspective the horror of Las Plagas and the strange warped reality that the village lived in. It turns out that because it was closed off from outsiders, the community was incestuous. The farmers and woodworkers and fishwives looked to each other as one big family. The children belonged to everyone. A few pages in, after Sadler and Mendez converted the masses and introduced the parasite, an entry reads,
I hurried to my brother's house. Something seemed strange about my brother. There were traces of blood vomit on the floor, and I heard that he had been writhing in pain. He glared at me with insane eyes and spoke words that made me want to cover my ears. Over the course of a few days, all the children in the village had died. All of our precious children were gone. Not a single one. Not a single one.
The diary also gives us insight into what it's like to be influenced under the parasite, but if you don't want to waste time there, we can find a foreman's log that shows it clearly. The children of the village might have died because their bodies rejected the plaga, but for regular villagers, the brainwashing brings mindless bliss.
Digging brings me so much joy.
The log reads,
I am full of happiness.
Ganados come in different forms, spreading out to a wide array of enemy types. Shields, crossbows, dynamite, stun batons, all bring something unique to a fight, even if it's just the length of their weapon or the husk of their voice. The sound of the cultists in the castle is very different from the sound of the villagers, a husky drawl that indicates the Plagas has warped their minds for longer. Combat can change quickly and significantly just from one new breed of bad guy joining the fray. We've already discussed how red-robed priests can stun Leon, but it's worth noting how the concealment of faces and heads seems to be a consistent through line for high-ranking Ganados. This is likely in keeping with how they see the head as sacred. The priests wear ram skulls, their lieutenants wear gold-plated skull masks. And when it comes to the elite Ganados in the village in the island, this through line continues. Some Ganados, like the bull-headed creatures that swing a sledgehammer or the boar-headed ones on the island, are disturbing, especially if we consider how the village was starving due to a lack of cattle. It seems El Gigante was just one reason. The other was how cows were beheaded for ritualistic reasons. It strengthens that fantasy aesthetic, making Resident Evil 4 feel less like a secret agent fighting terrorists and more like a stranger lost in a folktale. They bring to mind minotaurs. It's with the ones wearing the boar mask that we see how the team hyper-fixated on leaning into a more horror tone. They're far creepier than the red beret wearing, bullet jacket donning minigun enemies that plagued the original's island chapter, without taking away from the particular type of threat that guy posed. I still don't think it goes far enough. I don't love my monsters wielding ranged weapons of any type because it makes the horror less intimate. But seeing them across a battlefield strikes fear. Masked men wielding weapons like crossbows, automatic nail guns, rocket launchers, or chainsaws. The trip mines, bear traps, and complex weaponry are the game's way of doubling down on the intelligence of our enemies, but Dr. Salvador and his sisters, the bag-headed, chainsaw-wielding one-hit killers, immediately up the stakes. They can raise the chainsaw to block shots, and through that simple mechanical addition, we learn something else about Ganados. They prioritize self-preservation. The potato sack or cloth face masks are presumably there to shield them from gore, but Salvador especially, with how his eyes bulbously poke out from the sack, hints at something else is going on under there. Is he already transforming? Why is he wearing the bag? The fact the Ganados like this, the ones who wield weapons, go from a methodical approach to a feral one means the feeling of fighting them bounces from one extreme to another. Oh god, they dodged? They're smart enough to dodge? Look at this thing, go back to dodging. Las Plagas is a very ancient evil. This isn't like the T-Virus, whose ancient origins weren't revealed until Resident Evil 5. Resi 4 leads with ye old evil that's resident. The human skin on the villagers, cultists, and eventual soldiers is just wrapping for the gooey, tentacular terror underneath. There's an emphasis on gore in the remake that isn't just of the Splatterhouse variety. It's meaty, it's stringy. Parts of Ganados blow off, revealing writhing, tiny tentacles at stumps. The parasite is wrapped around the muscle and sinew and nervous system of the villagers, threatening to poke through the flesh. Our bullets just give it an excuse. Some Ganados resurrect. Their necks are twisted and snapped, but they writhe on the ground and then raise to their feet. For a first-time player, the fact this happens with our very first Ganado is a shame. I personally think it's more powerful if newcomers are forced to wait for this reveal. But as a remake, as someone who knows what Las Plagas is, the tonal shift works. We see various different versions of the parasite and it broadens the evolutionary threat of Las Plagas. From an egg implanted in the host, they evolve. Guadana, or Scythe, is the version with writhing tentacles, disparate eyeballs, and a whipping, sharpened blade that whirls around. They're not fully formed yet, so it moves erratically, searching for structure. The second version, Mandibula or Jaw, is what happens next. A great, worm-like creature bursts out of the cultists in the castle because they've been exposed longer than the villagers. Our first interaction with one has it latch to the ceiling and leap over to Leon, something they unfortunately don't really do again. Despite that, there is a mechanical difference that Mandibula brings to separate itself from Guadana in gameplay. They shoot acidic globs of the black water at Leon. That continues with the third stage, Arana, or Spider. Whether or not this is the final form of the submissive breed of parasite is uncertain, but it's certainly the result of longer incubation. They too first appear in the castle, coming from cultists and miners who were first exposed during that initial excavation. What's especially terrifying is that they don't need to incubate inside a host to control them. They hop on the backs of ganados like a brittle cage, giving them newfound strength and speed. And when we kill the host, the damn things scuttle around separately. Through research notes, we learn more and more about the Plaga and how they have a foundation in real-life science. The fact Osmond Sadler can control his cult through a magic parasite staff is silly, but the implication is that the parasite wrapped around it is an extension of himself. How scientifically does it do this? Pheromones? A psychic link? Despite research notes listing real-world examples like parasites found in ants, snails, and fish, no parasites that we know of behave like this. Resident Evil 4 keeps a toe dipped in the scientific while throwing its whole body into a sea of the fantastical. Leon has experience fighting bioweapons like zombies and mutants. He wasn't prepared for monsters out of myth. The Colomios are wolves infected with the Plaga. Their huge, oversized mouths and extra fangs give them a big, malicious grin, and when we place them side by side with the friendly wolf we can rescue earlier, we see another example of an other destabilizing a group. The wolves likely lived in harmony before, but after the pack was infected, our friendly wolf found himself in the middle of an animal kingdom that crumbled around him. Returning to the attention to detail that Resident Evil 4 prioritizes, the wolves won't attack Leon unless they spot him, but when they evolve into their tentacular parasite version, they home in on us without a second thought, as if the Plaga can sense the parasite incubating inside us.
You sick!
What's the purpose of the black water? It spouts from ceremonial fountains, and here in the throne room, Ramon Salazar feeds it to Ashley. It's one part of the game's lore that's only implied rather than clearly explained. Salazar will eventually spit it, and it seems like it's saved for the upper echelon of the cult. The Guadana don't seem to have drunk any, but the Mandibula do. Perhaps it's a superfood that speeds up the incubation process. Tired of Leon tearing through his castle, Ramon tosses us into a spiked pit full of the stuff. A cave network will lead us back to the surface, but there's something waiting for us down here. Something with sharpened talons, beady ocelli, and a predatorial hunger. Not Verdugo, we'll get to him in a minute. I'm talking about the unseen, the Navistador. The Navistador might look like bugs and sound like bugs and buzz around like bugs, but they were actually once human. Salazar tasked the scientist Isidro Uriarte Talavera to, quote,
"Improve upon the flaws of our human form, to seek perfection as observed in our arthropodal siblings. The womb is the key."
Jesus Christ, what is it with this series and wombs? In 2005, the Navistador could turn invisible. We had to watch a space for the patter of footprints or the glint of their green fluorescent eyes. In the remake, their ability to disguise themselves is even more insidious. They don't turn invisible, they behave more like chameleons, camouflaging themselves like parts of the environment. And they get me every damn time. They're not particularly strong. A few well-placed handgun rounds will twist them up, but their power lies in their numbers and their ability to stay hidden. They bring a seismic shift to how we approach combat. Running and gunning is still an option, but you're asking to be ambushed. The key is to go slow, steady, and keep your wits about you. The Gatadors are special, both in their design and in their significance to the cult. There are a few, but the first we find was once Salazar's torturer, a man so in love with agony that it seems he eventually let the cult do to him what he once did to others. The Plaga has been fused to his spine, similar to how El Gigante was created, and the pain has driven him insane. To protect themselves, the cult sewed his eyes shut, but in the darkness of the castle, other senses have sharpened. Tension comes from chains. They rattle if Leon knocks them, and the Gatador comes roaring out of the shadows, wild claws flailing. Like every other monster Leon faces, there's strategy here. If shot, bells could pierce its acute hearing, so it goes on a rampage, getting stuck in the wall. These appear later, but the dungeon doesn't have them. For someone who played the original, there's an initial sense of panic. A small claustrophobic room without the go-to strategy from the old days. The Armadura are bizarre. Back in 2005, Ashley fell victim to static suits of armor that swung axes in QuickTime events. It was never explained why the armor attacked. The implication was that they were traps triggered by Salazar. The remake takes that idea and fleshes it out into a full, explained enemy type. They're suits of armor with a Guadana Plaga inside, a place of refuge for the parasite after their host bodies are destroyed. They wait patiently for a new host to pass by. Leon and Ashley are just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Kicking their heads off is the key to taking them down, but they retain their mysticism by how wild this is conceptually. It breaks what we previously understood about the parasites, that in their early stages they can live without a host. And it makes it feel like the castle is out to get us, not just the cult. So-called heroes of the Inquisition era live on, swinging blindly with sharpened swords.
You're Ramon's lapdog.
Ramon Salazar's right hand, the Verdugo or U1, wasn't always like this. He is in fact the scientist Talavera, experimenting on himself to more faithfully serve Ramon Salazar. In the caves he hunts us, a complex that he knows well because it was once his lab. Its exoskeleton is rock hard, glinting in the dim light like shining obsidian. Tiny glittering eyes, a long tail and sharp claws can cleave our health. This is the closest Resident Evil ever comes to pitting us against a xenomorph, and it works. We fight through a metal maze as it stalks us, stomach tightening as it slithers in and out of pipes. The goal is to survive until the elevator comes, but let's put the bastard out of his misery instead, eh? Liquid nitrogen is the trick. In the past it was in cans. Leon would need to whack them over so he could line up shots, but that's been tweaked in the name of tension, pressure, risk, and reward. Instead, we need to hit a button and it'll blast out of the pipes. This is powerful because there's a 2-second delay before the gas comes, meaning we have 2 seconds to lure Verdugo into place, need to be close to it, and if we don't get out of the way, we can hurt ourselves. U1 is one of the best bosses in the remake, mainly because it's so faithful to what was brilliant in 2005. Thank God it wasn't cynically cut out and saved for DLC. Am I right, you three? Resident Evil 4's monsters are so chilling, so meaty, so fun to fight, that you could point to any one of them as the standout creature of the game. Doc Salvador is iconic. El Gigante mustered such a reaction that Capcom copy-pasted it into Resident Evil 5. Verdugo chills us to the bone. But they're not what most of us remember when we look back at Resident Evil 4. This is. If you saw it in broad daylight, you might be forgiven for laughing at the Regenerator. Its derpy slit of a mouth, its sunken chest and popped stomach, its flapping limbs and wobbly walk. But underestimate it at your peril. It saves the tone of the third act because the island is so explosive and bombastic. They step out of an Umbrella scientist's dream, a creature designed to be a weapon, not just a victim of the last Plaga's tragedy. They don't have just one parasite, they've been implanted with a few. A gasping, ragged breath heralds it. An alien soundtrack whinges distantly. It's as if the organs inside are struggling to function because of the legs and tentacles pushing against them. Their grey flesh is grown disproportionately. Sagging mass sits on one side. Its legs pulse and bulge, and because of how flexible it is, it's able to regrow limbs, clumps of flesh, and even its face. Destroying the Plaga inside isn't the only way to kill them, but their health bar is so large that it's your best bet. That means the thermal scope is key. Because we're forced to look down a scope, we lose what little sense of place we initially had. While we're focusing on this one, another might be ready to chomp our head off. Later, a second variation appears, the Iron Maiden. The spikes that have been fused with their flesh will explode outwards, piercing Leon upon death. They were designed this way on purpose. They screw the cap on the cruelty of the cult and the man who oversaw their creation.
Go now. Deliver to these vagrant children their salvation.
As you wish.
Let's talk about the weird. Speaking to Vice, producer Yoshiaki Hirabayashi said,
"In the original game, Ramon Salazar has a little hat. It's a very old-style costume. The major concept we wanted to change was having more of an aristocratic design, more realistic in the castle setting. That included the costume and the hat he was wearing. When looking into remaking him, we realized that we had to drop the hat, because it didn't really fit into the big structure. And also, you don't wear a hat indoors."
I find it strange that Salazar's goofy little sailor hat was cut because in the grand scheme of things, Resident Evil 4 Remake hasn't lost its weird sense of humor. It's just made a point of blending it with sincerity. There are casualties. Leon doesn't call Salazar bro anymore. Ashley doesn't mount a digger and smash through a slow-speed chase. Some of these I'm sad to see go. Others, I never felt particularly affectionate about. The wild, erratic, tonal whiplash of the original was part of what made it so wonderful. The cheese, the whimsy, the dreamy, surreal, and bizarre gave the game a heap of charm. I don't think anyone would be pulled out of the game if Salazar wore a tricorn, but thankfully, the team didn't bring that attitude to the merchant's shooting range, the suplexes, the minecart, or the quips.
Then come, Sancho Panza. Let us rescue the Princess Dulcinea.
You're gonna hurt yourself.
Hey, that was my lance.
Luis Serra returns with a gift. In the castle mines, he gives Leon a suppressant. It won't kill the Plaga, but it's bought us some time, and there's one sample left for when we need it. It would be all too easy to frame Luis as a simple comic relief character, to dump all the banter and jokes on him and make the rest of the game a serious, grim fight through hell. Interestingly, that was part of the original plan for Resident Evil 1. This guy, Dewey, was going to serve exclusively as a comic relief character, but he was later cut. It'd get grating fast, but in Luis's case you could do it. Thankfully, he isn't that. His sense of humor is character-driven. An obsession with Don Quixote has colored how he sees the world. Heroes, villains, damsels. In an attempt to distract himself from his sins, Luis has become the titular character from the story. Just like Don Quixote, he pretends to be someone he's not, a carefree rogue. So, who is Luis Serra? The remake revitalizes him. The bones of the original were solid, a Los Illuminados scientist who got cold feet, but fleshing out his screen time and his history adds context. In the remake, he's not just a Los Illuminados scientist, he was also an Umbrella one. Serra isn't his real name. Born Navarro, he's from the village and fled after his grandfather died. He found work with Umbrella, joining the Dream Team in Laboratory Number 6. Laboratory 6 was working on NE alpha parasites. Laboratory 6 created the Nemesis. He resigned after Raccoon City fell to chaos and went into hiding, eventually returning to his home and working for Los Illuminados. What makes him so awesome is that Luis is the only time in the whole series that we look at redemption through the lens of Resident Evil. But does he redeem himself? Regret goes a long way, making amends and helping Leon goes further. Fighting side by side in the mine endears us to him because he actually helps. It sacrifices the original's fear in the mine and the temple because fun with friends often kills terror. Just ask Resident Evil 5 or Resident Evil 6. But it's hard to be mad at that because the tension is so palpable elsewhere, the section is so short, and it helps to flesh Luis out as an ally rather than as a cryptic figure. Much like in 2005, we fight Dos Gigante in the heart of the mine where the trick is to drop them into a lava pit. If you can't drop both, Luis eventually helps against the armored one by throwing dynamite on its back. Likeability only goes so far. Just like how Ashley opens up parts of our exploration, the player values Luis because he's useful. The quips are only half of the battle.
Give us a push, Sancho.
Who are you calling Sancho?
Leon's one-liners make a glorious return with a very different tone now. Back in 2005, Leon's humor served three purposes. The first was to antagonize the villains, bravery in the face of fear. The second was to keep Ashley calm. And the third was for an unseen audience, like a laugh track played in his head after a punchline. What made it so fun was that sometimes, most of the time, the game would punish him for his jokes. At the beginning of the original, he chides the two cops escorting him, asking if they expect to sit around a bonfire singing Kumbaya together. It's a bullish statement that shows his growth into a confident hero, but future events make it tasteless in retrospect. When we eventually arrive at the village, one of the officers is burning in a bonfire. Remake Leon is moodier. Because the game overtly spells out his survivor's guilt at the start, his humour is framed as a defense mechanism. If he wasn't joking, he'd be screaming, and the game retains the malicious glee of its predecessor. Outside El Gigante's first arena, he tuts at the massive hammer stuck in mud. Good luck finding someone to wield that. Give it an hour, Leon. Notably, he doesn't quit when he's in serious mortal peril. Afterwards, sure, when he falls into the cave under the castle, he looks at a body impaled on the stalagmites and mutters, "Talk about sticking the landing." But if we take where we are right now, we see a perfect example. The explosive minecart ride from the 2005 game is now a bombastic roller coaster featuring Luis. Toward the end, the brake snaps off. Leon's response isn't a quip, it's a frustrated, sincere, "Are you serious?" He mutters to himself during big fights and skirmishes, panting "one down" like he's Gimli in Lord of the Rings, but he doesn't discard threats. The best example of this is after the ambush in the village square. Nicobostolidis changes the delivery of the iconic bingo line with just a slight flicker of intonation.
Where's everyone going? Bingo?
It's not a punchline, it's exasperation. But it's not a perfect balance. Salazar's hat wasn't the only thing the remake cuts. They hacked off his right hand, too.
I've sent my right hand to dispose of you.
Your right hand comes off?
Say whatever you please. Die, you worm!
Salazar's right hand doesn't come off, and for that, Resident Evil 4 Remake loses a point. This is my favourite moment in Resident Evil 4. Not the terror of the Regenerador lab, not the battle against Krauser, this. When we enter the castle hacks Leon's radio, meaning we're regularly stopped in our tracks while the little twerp rings us up to monologue. Eventually, when Salazar drops us into the boss fight with Verdugo, we get this moment. What's beautiful about this isn't just that it's a stellar comeback, it is, write it on my grave, but Salazar's response. We eventually get catharsis when we put him in the ground, but there is narrative catharsis to seeing him wail and shriek and lose his temper like a child. All because a peasant talked back. It's hilarious. Unfortunately, none of our villains hack our comms now. That's a shame because it kills how isolating it felt when something once reliable, Hunnigan calling us up with tips and objective markers, becomes hostile. Instead, the signal with Hunnigan fizzles and pops, while Ada and Luis remain a constant.
Luis!
Long time no see, rookie.
Major Krauser? What the hell? Why?
Jack Krauser was never a camp villain, nor a source of humour or punchlines. Where the original game had Sadler kill Luis, the remake gives that honour to Krauser, and it's a smart move. It means we're emotionally invested in him immediately, regardless of his mysterious status and general absence. Why is he here? Why would a US agent work for terrorists? The format is important. A knife fight lends credence to Leon's comment to Ada about knives being better for close encounters. Krauser gives that line meaning because it's clearly a lesson he taught Leon. In 2005, he stepped into the game's third act with limited screen time, an excellent boss fight, and a swathe of quick-time events. They were supposed to be an answer to the lack of tension cutscenes bring in a horror game. You were never safe, even when the camera angle changed, and for the time, they did do that. If we take Krauser's first appearance in 2005, this is a lengthy cutscene with a lot of QTEs to work through. If you fail one and Leon dies, your punishment was sitting through the whole thing again. Krauser's intro was a cutscene-driven boss fight. But in 2025, QuickTime events have lost their luster. In the case of Resident Evil 3's remake, they're used as a gimmick that negates Nemesis as a force of nature. Link to that video is below, and while you're there, fancy subscribing? Capcom have cut them in Resident Evil 4 remake. There aren't button-mashing sequences where Leon flees from a boulder or dodges an axe. What that means for Krauser is his first fight is more fluid. As a character, he has changed, but Leon still needs to fight him with a knife. We're more involved in the action. Rather than waiting for trigger buttons to flash on screen, we get to be in control of the cool flips, kicks, and parries. It's more engaging, and the fact that there are no breaks at all makes it more tense. For another example, let's look at Leon's next stop, Robo Salazar. The humongous statue that came alive and chased Leon to Ramon's boss fight is one of the goofier parts of the original Resident Evil 4. It's wacky, it's out of left field, and it wasn't supposed to be in the game. It turns out that one of the animators thought the game was getting a bit too serious, so the team went back and added some wilder stuff. Resident Evil 4 is an incredibly fun video game, but as a horror, it feels like its second half is afraid to be grim. One of the reasons I like the remake so much is that it doesn't feel that way, but still finds clever ways to incorporate the weird. Robo Salazar is in the remake, as are the stone dragons that breathe fire in the lava pit. It's just they've been smooshed together to form something new. The statue doesn't chase us now, instead, the head turns, blasting a flamethrower at Leon as we work through a legion of cultists. It's a new combat scenario that adds tension, and is also dumb as hell. I love this thing. Leon still jumps on chandeliers, the minecart is intact, the beat where we, as a player, can sit on a throne as "there's no time for resting" shimmers on screen remains. Leon checks his ammo by flipping his gun around in a very cool way. The mic sequence with the chopper is unfortunately still here, more on that later. For every piece of action-packed dumb fun that gets cut, there's something new or reworked. The red priest on the Gatling gun has been scrapped. Thank God, screw that guy, I'm glad he's gone. But now an armoured gigante stands on the castle walls and hurls missiles at us. We need to get to a cannon to blow him away. Salazar's hat might be cut, but now there's a side quest where we need to find a portrait of him and throw an egg at it. Ramon might not hack Leon's comms to monologue about script writing, but that back and forth is very present during his boss fight.
Such a fool, Mr. Kennedy. To have been bestowed with Lord Sadler's...
You talk too much.
Failed.
When we reach him, we're too late. The ritual is complete. Ashley has drank the black water and Krauser has taken her to a nearby island. All that's left is to follow. Ramon stands in our way. A reading of Ramon Salazar's boss dialogue, for your pleasure.
You're nothing but an extra in my script, Mr. Kennedy. Why don't you show me what a first-class script looks like, through your own actions? Now we transition to a regular meter, but oh dear, I just realised I haven't set the cast of this play.
Read the words on screen and tell me the remake's not as funny, I dare you. Ramon Salazar is the only boss that is significantly different from the original, and it's not quite as impactful. He tells us to stay still, but it's him who needs to stop for less than a second. The only time he's truly vulnerable is when he's spraying acid, and sometimes he'll hit us with pinpoint accuracy and barely any telegraphing. A one-hit kill devours us if we're not careful, but he clips through platforms and stairs, so sometimes it feels like we've dodged it, but he'll zap through the floor to munch on Leon anyway. Sometimes downing him will actually block the path to him, so we can't get there in time for those all-important knife attacks. He drops acid mines around the arena, but we're so busy looking up to see where he is that we'll blindly run into them. Difficult? Yes. Fun? Not really. In 2005, he merged with his left hand, his other bodyguard, and turned into a boss that effectively was the arena. Massive tentacles slammed down on top of us, and we had to duck and dodge. It wasn't complex, in fact it was incredibly simple, but the scale of the thing and the catharsis of making him bleed was more than enough. His left hand, Pisanta, isn't present for this fight because she's been shoved into Ada's DLC. That's extra annoying because there's a memo from Pisanta before she turned into a monster where she pledges to
watch over Master Ramon until the very end, whatever fate may befall us.
That would be true if we were talking about 2005, where she merges and dies with him, but in the remake, it doesn't have narrative payoff. Salazar dies the way he lived, shrieking, berating, and projecting his insecurities. During the battle, he calls Leon Pulgarcito, loosely translating as Tom Thumb. It's a word his father used when abusing him as a child. Remake Salazar heralds a departure for Resident Evil's villains. He's an example of a hurt person who went on to hurt more people. If you dig deep, you might be able to find an ounce of sympathy for him. Personally, I'm just glad he's dead. When do you think Resident Evil went off the rails? Here's the thing about the island. As a section, it takes Resi 4 from a 10 to a 9, and then slots in the Regenerators and Krauser's fight to bump it back up to a 9.5. Returning to the 2005 game, I couldn't shake the feeling that it's too long, loses the balance between action and horror, dull in its enemy variety, and boring as a setting. It's no surprise that in the run-up to Resident Evil 4 Remake, people started to wonder if they'd cut it, because I'm not alone in thinking all of this. The good parts of the island could be added to the castle grounds to give Sadler and Krauser a substantial section of the game, and nothing would be lost. Resident Evil 4 Remake doesn't fix my problems with the island, but through dint of being shorter, it certainly mitigates them.
You look like you've got something to say.
I have something to ask you. But I don't think I'll get a straight answer.
Journeying to the island together, Leon confronts Ada about Raccoon City. She deflects, and he considers the person he's become in the face of all the horror that he's witnessed. He says he's changed, he's hardened. Ada disagrees. His golden heart's still there. It's what draws her to him. He's everything she thought she'd lost after years of working as a mercenary. The island's defenses were set up by Krauser for Sadler, an addition for the remake. This is where the cult was banished after Gregorio Salazar butchered them, and for years they've plotted their eventual return. It's a great addition because it makes the island feel less like it's randomly bolted onto the third act for the sake of variety. After creeping through an isolated village and swallowing the diseased air of an old castle, the island shows that Los Illuminados aren't as archaic as we first believed. Osmond Sadler has a whole paramilitary operation here, with toys for war that aren't just biological. Bunkers, barbed wire, futuristic labs, machine gun turrets, and bulletproof vehicles have sprouted around a mystical temple in the island's heart. There's just one new monster here, the Regeneradors. Everyone else are Ganados, albeit with twists and tweaks to try and keep them fresh. Helmets reduce the efficacy of headshots, stun batons fry Leon, knee pads and plating mean we need to be more careful with our shots. There is strategy here, there are tactics to consider, but ultimately it comes back to padding the health of enemies we've already fought. We are shooting more, sometimes we're taking cover behind sandbags. We are frightened less. A lot of our bad guys shoot at us from a distance. Crossbows, machine guns, automatic nail guns. Some of these guys have rocket launchers, for God's sake. I'd say it spoils how special Nemesis rocket launcher was in Resident Evil 3, but 2020's remake ruined it anyway, so who cares? The military tech is extra in the remake. Sure, the super secret lab had lasers to leap through, something sliced out of Leon's campaign and moved into Ada's, but in the original, it felt like Los Illuminados had moved into an old complex and repurposed it. In 2025, it feels like they built it. The antique mirror puzzle in the opening section is gone. Now, there are automated laser turrets that we need to reprogram. All of my issues with the island are summed up with one man. A man called Mike.
Hunnigan, I owe you one.
Mike has been sent in as backup for Leon. He soars in on a Bell UH-1 chopper and we're tossed into a fiery, adrenaline rush, shooty bang bang time. I didn't care for this in the original and I don't care for it in the remake. It's just an opportunity to run around like a fool and get free ammo. Say goodbye to careful resource management. We watch Mike have all the fun as he blows up pillboxes and soldiers, occasionally segueing into slow-mo. It's a big fuck you hoorah moment that doesn't feel earned yet. We haven't overcome the horror. There's over an hour of game left. When the sequence transitions away from Mike, it's over to turrets and hordes of enemies that overwhelm and annoy rather than scare, the Resident Evil 5 treatment. If you're trying to find the fun in all of this action, the game interrupts you by cutting away to watch a cutscene where Mike blows shit up. Get him, Bugs, knock him out of the sky, give me back my horror! But of course, that's not all that the island is. Mike and the rocket launchers and the turrets and the wide open, dull spaces are only half of our time here. The other half is dedicated to a claustrophobic facility where tight corridors mark the way, keycards are scarred by the cult's ideology, and creepy frozen plagas sit on surgical tables, part of deranged experiments. It's in here that we find Ashley.
Sorry I'm late.
No. Thank you. You brought the medicine just in time.
Not for the last time, we rescue Ashley. She's not looking good. The plague inside her is on the cusp of breaking through. Ever the hero, and despite his own parasite fighting for release, Leon injects her with the suppressant that Luis gave him. He's bought her time at his own expense. Narrative tension reactivated. So let's look at the mechanical tension. The island's lab is incredibly tense. The regenerators, shuffling the power, hunting for keycards, it all compounds to bring that classic Resi feeling that comes from being forced to backtrack through a space that we think we understand, just to have that understanding ripped away from us. But we can zoom in on specific moments that showcase how the remake harnesses its tension in general. A room with 4 vats. 4 regenerators are inside. One of these regenerators has a wrench inside it that we need to get, so we have to break it out and execute it quickly. If we take too long or are too sporadic with our shots, we might accidentally break the other tanks, and then we'll have 4 of the bastards to contend with. That's tense enough, but even if we're really careful with our shots, we get ambushed by Ganados with dynamite after we retrieve the wrench. Suddenly the chances of another regenerator breaking free have doubled, and we've got a horde on our hands. Or what about this bunker full of body bags? Inside are regenerators waiting to slip out and eat Leon's face. We need to creep by them, and if we knock one loose, whoosh, welcome to the monster mash. The positioning of this section adds to that tension because it toys with player psychology. It's very likely you won't have the bioscope that lets you actually fight these things because it's been ages since you needed one. And you know what? I trust you. I feel comfortable confessing when I shit myself. Let's keep working backwards. When Leon's dropped into the cave network, Navistadors skulk under deep water. Previously, we've been on the lookout for their huddled shapes camouflaged against stone. Now, the context has changed, and they're slightly stronger because when we shoot them in the water, the bullets are slowed. You need to use more ammo. The suits of armor are obviously terrifying because they seem so impossible, but there's a lovely boost to tension after we first fight them. We get introduced to them in this small arena, a fight that's tough because of the short space and the fact they just keep coming. Seconds after though, when we catch our breath, we need to work through a long corridor full of suits of armor. None of them jump out, but you don't know that yet. Or here, back in the village, we are presented with a very obvious, unmissable rock slide held up by loose piping. We need to walk under that. It never triggers, but it makes you wonder if it will. Just like with the previous remakes, there's that classic delay when Leon pulls out his torch in a dark space. Moving from a lit room to a black one brings those important, pregnant seconds where you wonder if there's anything ahead. The game likes to play with you. Catharsis might have been one of Capcom's main gameplay pillars, but that catharsis is mainly effective because the build-up is so powerful.
I am Osman Sadler, the speaker for our Lord.
Tell someone who gives a shit.
When Sadler finally steps into the light and introduces himself to Leon, we don't wait for that tension to build. He's no stranger to the sort of hand Sadler's about to play by this point, and he opens fire immediately. It has no effect. Sadler calls in Ashley's Plaga, tries to make her shoot Leon, but she's able to fight it. Her strength of will is reinforced again. Sadler can summon her away, but he can't make her kill. Not yet. We're once again left alone, and Krauser stands between us and our finale. Jack Krauser is a man concerned with legacy. After being abandoned by his superiors on a bioweapons operation, his work for the US government was wiped and redacted. All trace of his service scratched from America's history. In joining Los Illuminados, he's now gone native. He was the one who abducted Ashley for the cult, and he wants to pass his teachings and legacy on to the man who was once his recruit, Leon.
I've prepared a battlefield up ahead just for us soldiers. Watered by the blood of generations, hundreds of years. It's the perfect place to put an end to what happened 2 years ago.
In a camp on the far side of the island, we find a fortress smeared with blood. Look alive, it says. Krauser has one final lesson for Leon, hidden in his personal house of horrors. Sadler tells Leon that Krauser is his faithful disciple, a man who will deliver our penance, but that's very different characterization to what we got in 2005. There, Krauser was an undercover agent, working alongside Ada. He was supposed to get close to Sadler so he could steal a sample of Las Plagas. His hatred for the US government remains, but Sadler never trusted him, mainly because of his origin.
Did you really think I'd trust an American? To tell you the truth, I was contemplating how to get rid of him.
It tied into that focus on the other. Resident Evil 4 preyed on xenophobia from an American perspective. Our villain, Sadler, harbored a deep anti-American sentiment, paralleling terrorist organizations we saw all over the news at the time of release. In the remake, it's Krauser who embodies that sentiment because the US government betrayed him. He is an active, devout member of the cult. What's strange is that in this story, it's implied Leon wasn't a part of Operation Javier. In the original canon, he was there with Krauser, a story told in the Dark Side Chronicles. The pair investigated a cartel in South America, and it turned out that Albert Wesker had sold the T. Veronica virus to a warlord called Javier Hidalgo. What Krauser saw there changed him, and he eventually defected to work for Wesker. Notably, that story ends with Leon failing to save a girl, Javier's daughter Manuela, adding another failure to his survivor's guilt. Cutting Leon out of Operation Javier scraps that. We find a file that says Krauser was the only survivor. Krauser himself points out that his entire unit was wiped out, the source of his bitterness.
You're even more naive than I thought. You can't save her. You can't save anyone.
Give it up, Krauser. Being a lackey for these maniacs won't bring your men back.
Because Krauser was so interested in legacy, he serves as the perfect jumping off point to talk about Resident Evil 4's and a chance to reconcile my complicated feelings around what it meant for the franchise back in 2005. So, if you'll indulge me, let's jump back in time. November 14th, 2002. Capcom hold an event called the GameCube New Game Announcement Meeting. There, after years of shuffling and rescheduling, Resident Evil 4 is announced. An 80-second trailer fades on screen. A narrator announces that we will see the cradle of the progenitor virus, amid shots of a derelict castle, an ominous black fog, and oppressive, varied camera angles. It ended with Leon being infected by something. The horror would remain intact, but Shinji Mikami described this as a full model change for the franchise. The game would be directed by this man, Hiroshi Shibata, once a background artist for Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. May 2003, the E3 Games Conference. A clip plays showing Shinji Mikami wearing sunglasses. He greets the attendees, snuffs out rumors that he had been fired as a Capcom producer, and announced that Resident Evil 4 was proceeding very smoothly.
Don't pee your pants.
What we saw next was new footage, now dubbed the Hallucination Build. In it, we saw a return to the bizarre castle, as well as combat in an over-the-shoulder perspective. There weren't any ganados or flips and kicks. Instead, Leon was stalked relentlessly by a creature called the Hook Man, who seemed to manifest at will. In the years since, we've picked up more about what that story would be. The goal was to continue and potentially conclude the Umbrella Saga. An earlier build, one that eventually became Devil May Cry, had us playing as Oswell Spencer's son. Thankfully, that was scrapped so we could get the adventures of Dante, and it then evolved into a story about Leon. A raid on Spencer's European castle, the headquarters of the Umbrella Corporation. It would bring everything full circle. The game's writer, Yasuhisa Kawamura of Resident Evil 3 fame, said that Silent Hill had served as inspiration for this more supernatural direction.
If we want to pursue horror, we need to find an unexplainable concept,
he said.
Let's create something that doesn't revolve around science or reason.
The hallucination mechanic was ambitious. The player wasn't supposed to know when it would happen, so various hidden checkpoints had to be set up that were dependent on the player's behavior. The team effectively had to create two types of 3D models for environments. This proved to be almost impossible because Resident Evil 4 was slated to be a GameCube exclusive, and as great as the GameCube was, it couldn't handle it. A few months later, as development stuttered, Shinji Mikami stepped in himself, and the game was completely overhauled.
I was the only one who could direct it,
he told Alex O'Neill in Itchy Tasty.
No one else could as they were busy with other projects. Kamiya was working on Okami, so he wasn't available either.
The Resident Evil 4 we got was a seismic shift from that original concept. It's a glorious video game, but sometimes, in the dead of night, I'll stare at the ceiling and wonder about what could have been, and the detrimental impact it would go on to have. A slow-paced horror game set in the heart of Umbrella's madness, putting Spencer front and center as the villain, and leaning on the progenitor virus as a source of bioweaponry that at first seemed supernatural and unexplainable. A stalker enemy to rival Nemesis in the Hook Man. Unkillable, unexplainable, intangible tension. It's the lack of sign-off for Umbrella that bothers me. One of the most iconic bad guy companies in video games gets whisked away in Resident Evil 4's opening credits, destroyed not by our heroes, but the stock market. That's fine as a way to eradicate Umbrella for good, but considering Resident Evil Code Veronica ends with the Redfields flying off and swearing to take them down once and for all, Resi 4's opening puts a dampener on that. Just one of the many reasons Code Veronica should be remade, am I right, Capcom? And then we turn our attention to what happened after Resident Evil 4. The franchise descended into two mainline entries that pulled away from the horror and reached for the action. Everyone loves Resident Evil 4, so let's just do that again, but in Africa. Oh, whoops, well, Resi 5 was a bit of a miss, but hey, don't forget, everyone still loves Resident Evil 4. The problem wasn't that 5 had all the fear of a vegan zombie, it was that we didn't go big enough with the explosions. All of that started with Resident Evil 4. Or more accurately, I'd say it all started with Resident Evil 4's third act. An island that gives us big explosions, and missiles, and Gatling guns, and a boss more at home in Metal Gear Solid than Resi. But despite what Resident Evil 4's legacy would turn into, I can't help but love it. It's not a genre-defining masterpiece, it's an industry-defining masterpiece. And my respect for the remake comes from knowing that it harnessed the horror focus rather than leaning into its explosive bits. It's not 2005's fault that Capcom learned the wrong lessons from its success. And even when the game gets wild, even when it paints with brushes from other series, it's fun as hell to play.
I dreamed well. Leon.
Krauser is my favorite boss in the game, just topping Verdugo. It's multi-layered, pulls directly from the original in all the right ways, and acts as a thematic wrapper to Leon's arc. "You can't save anyone," Krauser roars. Leon's fears made manifest, and a fear he'll soon conquer. Krauser uses traps and gadgets to keep us feeling oppressed. He leaps down from hiding spots in dusty ruins to swipe at us with his knife, meaning we get to return to the close-quarter style that was such a highlight after Luis's death. A period in the dark puts us on edge as he rants and raves from the shadows. A Metal Gear boss he might be, but that doesn't stop Krauser from bringing the tension. It's quick and panicky, and when he finally loses all inhibitions and mutates a bulletproof wing, he embodies the threat that Los Illuminados poses. Invasion by an army of Krausers. In the end, he earns his warrior's death. There's rage and pain as Leon executes him, a man betrayed by the people we're working for. Just like Salazar, just like Sadler, Krauser is another hurt person who went on to hurt people. He says this isn't about revenge, it's about power, but what the government did to him paved that path. And Leon proves again why that doesn't need to be an inevitability.
You have come, my child.
What do you want?
I simply wish to share this gift with as many as possible.
For the last time, Leon Kennedy saves Ashley Graham, but this time he has help. Ada Wong arrives, distracting Sadler long enough for us to make our escape. So let's pivot away from the main story and ask, what is Ada doing here? Let's go our separate ways and check in with the second stranger.
Your favorite, I believe?
Excellent timing, Ada. You know how I feel about being tied up.
Back in the day, Separate Ways wasn't downloadable content. It was an entire secret part of the game, unlocked after we rolled credits. It was a fun, quick treat that put us in the shoes of Ada and gave us some insight into what she was doing when she wasn't popping up to flirt with Leon. The cutscenes were minimal, the areas, bar one, were rehashed. With that in mind, I struggle to be upset that Remake's Separate Ways was sold separately. This isn't just a DLC, it's an expansion that's as long as Resident Evil 3 Remake, a game that cost $60, where this cost $10. Numerous new cutscenes that flesh out the overall story, not one but 3 boss fights. A chunk of unique scenarios, side quests, new weapons, and gameplay gimmicks that make Ada feel unique as a hero. One of its strengths is how it gives us more screen time with Luis. His presence in the main campaign was already given depth and nuance, but spending time with him in Ada's shoes adds to his charm and shows his desperation to find redemption. At one point, his lab burns down, taking with it his ability to make more suppressants. He panics, as if the fire has burned away a last gasp for his soul. Ada's here to make contact with him and retrieve the Amber, a dominant species of Las Plagas that her employer has a special interest in. Jolene Anderson no longer plays her. Now it's Lily Gao, who stepped into her heels in the live-action film Welcome to Raccoon City. I won't be buying the Ada Wong DLC if Lily Gao is voicing her. Not only is she a terrible voice actress, but I won't support anti-white racism. Please stop hiring these people. Good, you should spend the money on some brain cells instead. Gao was the subject of some backlash for her portrayal of Ada, more so than any other actor in the game. Lines like this,
"That's my job,"
buzzed around the internet because it doesn't sound like Ada. But I think 4 Makes Ada has that emotional human touch that carries over from Anderson's portrayal in 2 Make. I'd go so far as to say that I really like her turn as Ada. Everyone rallies around "that's my job," a line that's laced with playful sarcasm and frustration, something that is very Ada Wong, but nobody ever comments on the stellar delivery of
"Not a bad move. Very smooth."
Saucy, seductive, threatening. That growing sense of unease and frustration is tantamount to what Separate Ways does with Ada. Shortly after rescuing Luis, he slips away and she's ambushed by Pisanta, Salazar's left hand. And it imprints on her. Just like Leon, Ashley, and Luis, she is now infected with a parasite. Her mission is given personal stakes, not just because Leon gets involved, but because over the course of the game, she will personally experience what it's like to be infected with a bioweapon. She's faced with the inevitable consequences of mission success, and she doesn't like what she sees, growing more anxious and frustrated as things go wrong. All while wearing a mask for her employer and Luis, a man she is calmly trying to manipulate. This concludes with her finally sacrificing the mission for the greater good. When finally she retrieves the amber, she decides to go off course, thinking she saved the world from global infection. But sure, share that TikTok again, that's really insightful criticism, guys. What is silly and brings the camp and cheese to her campaign is how much she talks to herself. The majority of Ada's story is filling in the gaps and showing how she's been supporting Leon without his knowledge. She distracts Mendez and saves his life. She rings the church bell that cancels the ambush in the square. Whenever she catches a glimpse of Leon off on his adventure, she'll mutter to herself,
"Don't worry, Leon. First time's free." So kind of you to keep our friends busy.
Keep them busy, Leon.
What was that? Is someone there? Ada might be the victim of misdirection at points, but do you know who else is? Her employer.
"I'm not here to babysit you. See that you remain an asset and not a liability. I have absolutely no use for your incompetence."
As Ada searches for Luis, the parasite takes hold and she collapses as it tugs at her nervous system. Albert Wesker, former captain of STARS, steps out of the gloom and saves her. In the remake timeline, Resident Evil 4 is our first look at him, and it's unfortunately a disappointment. Craig Bernatowski wears the sunglasses. DC Douglas, who gave Wesker his grim, understated snarl before, has been recast. Wesker here has a very different sound. A whispering hush that I think could work, but it's not the voice that's my issue, it's the direction. Albert Wesker's cold arrogance is in his dialogue, but it's not in his performance. Resident Evil 4 Remake gives us the world's most impatient man, constantly annoyed to the point that he's ratty. In fact, his impatience is such a consistent through line in this game that it's turned into a gag later.
I'll send you the new coordinates. And remember, I do not like
Waiting, I know.
The issue is that he doesn't seem particularly in control of his scenes. Take this beat in the bedroom after he rescues Ada. What's on the page is, "I'm not here to babysit you. See that you remain an asset and not a liability. I have absolutely no use for your incompetence." It's an order. 3 simple sentences that lay out his expectations for Ada and the mission. But Bernatowski infuses them with rushed delivery and frustrated sighs to show how annoyed he's getting. Wesker always carried a restrained rage, but he was so in control that he only let it out when it served him. Cold, arrogant, orderly. Where's the man so confident in his plans that he calculates how long he can play with his food in Resident Evil 5? I like this characterization for what Wesker represents, a eugenicist that plays the long game even when it clashes with his short-minded ideals, but it isn't Albert Wesker. If Resident Evil 5 Remake is somewhere on the horizon, I hope Capcom develops Bernatowski's sound so that he's more patient. What else is impatient is the gameplay, and that is a major positive for Ada's position in the story. We're supposed to play all of this after we've conquered Los Illuminados, so the game lets you enjoy the power fantasy rather than basking in the horror. The Ganados aren't as scary. In fact, they're characterized as quite goofy. There's a fun beat in the churchyard where Ada gets to watch peacefully as they push past her and stand patiently outside the church. They're in a trance because we rang the church bell, so ripe for a grenade. This is the part where I was going to throw a grenade, but I don't have any. They steal Leon's jacket and Krauser's beret. We're playing as a secret agent with magic contact lenses and a grapple. It's all about the flips and kicks and less about brooding tension. That doesn't mean we don't get chances to stop and settle into the level design. Puzzles return for Ada, but Iris, those contact lenses, spoil some of them. One section has us crack a custom lock by figuring out the order of 3 specimens in a collections room. Iris makes it so that we don't have to use our brain, we can just follow a set of footprints. That's just one gadget though, the other is much more interesting. Ada's grapple makes her feel distinct from Leon while strengthening her as a spy. It opens up certain environments and adds flexibility to fights. Take the hedge maze. Leon had to wander through brushes, bushes and walls of fauna as we found our way through. Ada can grapple over them. The grapple also means that her fight against El Gigante gets to feel very different. At the windmill, it attacks and we can leap from rooftop to rooftop while it knocks down buildings. There's a sincere attempt to make this campaign not retread the greatest hits of Leon's campaign, but even when it does, additions like the grapple make it feel fresh. It's a shame that it's generally restricted to specific scenarios. Ada can only grapple at specifically designated vantage points, and there are lengthy parts of her story where it doesn't serve a purpose. Take ladders, for example. There's a point in the castle where there's a hole we drop down, but strangely can't zip back up. Instead, we need to hobble around some stairs to climb a ladder. And even in the case of ladders, it's not like we can zip back up them, we still need to climb. But elsewhere, we do find a use for it in the beat-to-beat gameplay. It acts as a tool in combat. Ada can kick enemies from further away by grappling into them, meaning she feels more reactive and responsive. Eventually, we can get a charm that lets her use it to rip shields off Ganados. It strengthens her identity and her combat prowess.
Good. And I got exactly what you want. Oh, that's not good.
All of this zipping and puzzle solving is in service to a fetch quest for Luis. When we reach the castle, he whips up a suppressant to buy her some more time, and he's ready to hand over the amber. The only problem is Ada can't carry it because she's infected with the plaga. Being near the thing makes her sick, spurs on her symptoms. Because her parasite is a part of Pasanta, killing the thing will kill the parasite. The mission has changed. The Hook Man might be left in the discarded pile that's now Resident Evil 3.5, but its essence returns in the form of Pasanta, aka the Black Robe, aka U3, aka It. Salazar's left hand goes by many names, but its role in separate ways is singular. It's a force of nature, ever present, a constant in Ada's campaign. She attacks in the castle, she attacks in the village square, and eventually she attacks in the caves. When she appears, she brings hallucinations with her, multiplying impossibly, tricking us into wasting our ammo unless we can spot those tiny glittering eyes. Back in 2005, Leon fought U3 on the island. A huge industrial set of containers dangled over a long drop, and as we worked around to find Ashley, it appeared. It's an awesome fight because Leon was trapped in an increasingly tight space with an unkillable monster. Intense panic and dread set in because we had to rush to safety, find our way through this labyrinth of containers, and shoot buttons that opened the way before parts of the structure plummeted into the abyss. It was unique and just a prelude to a one-on-one battle to the death. That's been cut from Leon's campaign and moved into Ada's. I appreciate that U3 now has a fleshed out history and scientific explanation. In the original, it was just one of Sadler's many experiments, but what we get in separate ways is a dilution when it comes to the boss. Now, we skip the fantastic crate labyrinth and jump straight into the one-on-one fight. A small arena on a cliff edge leads to a second stage where U3 transforms into a plagas-ridden centipede. The issue is the damn thing doesn't stay in the arena long enough to actually fight it. You're mainly stuck running around aimlessly until it appears, fighting Navistadors. I guess someone at Capcom really liked the annoying Nemesis fight that just spawns zombies. U3 isn't the only thing that's been carved out of Leon's campaign and pushed into Ada's. Moving moments sequence out of his adventure and into hers is a smart way to easily flesh out separate ways while keeping to the blueprint of the original game. The island doesn't overstay its welcome because it's shorter, but it's only shorter because moments like the laser corridor and U3 have been moved here. The sewer system leading into the hive has been removed from Leon's second act and stamped into Ada's. At least Luis uses red paint to guide our way here. Guess the guy got the memo about the color yellow. The same goes for the cable car sequence. Previously, this was in Leon's village. Now it's on Ada's island. Some of the castle's traps too have been slotted in here, and on the surface, it might seem like separate ways has been cobbled together by stuff left on Remake's cutting room floor. But context is everything. Take the laser gates. This sequence is now framed in a brand new location that's unique to Ada's story. When she reaches the island, Wesker instructs her to trigger a series of explosions from a main relay up the hill. That relay is built on top of Sadler's most prestigious laboratory, and in that laboratory is Martinico. It's a creature impervious to bullets that chases Ada into the laser sequence. Turns out that lasers can pierce its skin, so Los Illuminados built this as a containment unit. It's not a boss fight, more of an event, but helps to flesh out what this room is, why it was built, and introduces a quick change of pace amid the grapples and explosions. Most interestingly of all is how Martinico could be a reference to S.D. Perry's novels. Ah, see, she always comes back. Perry never wrote a novelization of Resident Evil 4. Her version of the series came to an abrupt halt with Resident Evil 0, but amidst the Umbrella saga she wrote 2 original books, Caliban Cove and Underworld. In Underworld, Leon, Claire Redfield, Rebecca Chambers, and a handful of allies go on a mission to destabilize an Umbrella operation. Deep in the lab, they find something bizarre. The creature-designated Tyrant series REH-1A, more commonly known as Fossil, was motivated purely by instinct, and it only had one: eat. All of its actions stemmed from that single primal urge. The environment was unfamiliar to Fossil, but not important. There was food, and it was hungry. Fossil is a tyrant species unlike anything we've seen before its appearance. It doesn't have the shape of a man, more a reptile that lacks a tail and has huge, meaty, 5-fingered hands. Its skin is a discolored brown grey. It's bulletproof. Sound like anyone we know? Guns might not work against Martinico, but that doesn't mean Ada doesn't pack a punch. She can grab 2 new kinds of shotgun, but as cool as they are, they're not the standout. The blast crossbow is. It's the bolt thrower, but good, with greater impact and solid damage. The shotgun's great for crowd control, but nothing comes close to what the crossbow allows when it comes to fragging a group of ganados. Where it really shines is in boss fights. Targeting a weak point doesn't just do the extra damage you'd expect, it trashes a boss's health bar. And as we come full circle, catching up with Leon, Sadler, and Ashley on the island, we see that best.
Wayward lamb, servant of the heretic wolf, this will be your trial and tribulation.
This temple confrontation is one of the examples I point to when arguing Resi 4 was designed with separate ways in mind. Ada's battle against Sadler isn't just a reskin, it's a tangible change that strengthens him as an overarching antagonist. Even before his final Scorpion King-esque form, he's an indomitable danger. As the fight continues, the temple falls apart, ending with crumbling pillars and ruins that Leon and Ashley need to work through later. Ashley wonders what could possibly have happened here, and Leon doesn't give an answer, but I like to think he has his suspicions. Ada happened. With just a couple of exceptions, Resi bosses are always solid when they're in tight environments because it ups the difficulty, lets them have wide, easily telegraphed swings, and lets them slow down so we don't get frustrated. The long alley of the temple makes things tense because Sadler is often in reach, and if we can put distance between us, he'll race up the aisle with sharp, spinning tentacles. He preaches as he wars, and even when we best him, he gets the final word.
This is gonna be hard to explain at customs.
Well done, Ada. Evacuate immediately.
Understood.
Someone is coming to pick you up.
Here's a fun fact. The game's director Yasuhiro Ampo didn't want to remake Resident Evil 4. Speaking to Game Informer, he said,
"Among the RE series, and even games in general, the original RE4 has become a legend. I knew it would be difficult to successfully remake it, and if we made one mistake with any updates we made, we would anger its fans. Honestly speaking, I didn't want to do it.
That's the kind of honesty you rarely get from a game head, but it also tells you how high the stakes were. The original Resident Evil 4 is revered, a masterpiece. Touching it at all was dangerous, changing it borderline heresy. And yet, here we are. Somehow, they pulled it off. Even Shinji Mikami, the man who wrote and directed the 2005 version, gave the remake his nod of approval. He's praised it for deepening the characters and improving, in his own words, the half-assed story he wrote in 2 weeks. That's not just humility, that's confidence in the team that followed him.
You did this.
Yeah. Yeah, I did this. Can you stand?
You feel that confidence in the final hour of the game. It doesn't rush, it doesn't fumble, it lands gasping in Luis's old lab. This time, it has to be different. It's a simple line, but it carries Leon's arc with it. He saves Ashley first, fulfills the mission. But it's not about duty anymore, it's personal. In the name of fleshing out what came before, we see flickers of how the parasite twists perception. Tunnel vision, refracted light, a world underwater. The game doesn't overplay it, but it's a sharp reminder that the horror of Resi 4 is conceptual as well as physical. It's not just about your body being invaded, it's your reality that's under siege. Ashley wakes, and in turn, she saves him. There's something so quietly powerful in how they hold each other up. The game doesn't make a meal of it, doesn't go for melodrama, but the emotional charge is clear. Leon Kennedy doesn't walk out of this alone. He doesn't limp away with the girl clinging to his back. They get each other out. Or they almost do. There's one final interruption. Osmond Sadler.
You far renegade!
He's taken Ada hostage, one last obstacle between Leon and the end. It's poetic. For years, Leon thought he failed to save Ada in Raccoon City, but now here he is, saving her with certainty. The completion of his arc brings our boss. Sadler's design is striking, all writhing legs and stretching limbs, like a spider sculpted from sinew. He's silhouetted against the night sky, framed like an apocalyptic omen. He looks like a final boss, which helps a lot because, mechanics-wise, the fight is solid but unspectacular. In fact, comparing it to 2005, there's a reduction in depth. At the halfway mark, he summons Navistadors, boo, as if the dev team doesn't have faith in Sadler to carry his own fight. You can't swing girders at him like in 2005 either, double boo. But his reach is longer, his movement is snappier, and his weak points flicker just long enough to feel earned. You've got to play more proactively. He talks, like all the major bosses in Resident Evil 4 do. Mendez, Salazar, Krauser, Sadler, they monologue, they preach, they sermonize. It's a cheesy, hateable angle that all of our baddies bring, patronizing us while we fill them with bullets. Resident Evil often shrouds its monsters in silence or roars, but number 4 gives them a voice. And what they say is just as terrifying as what they do. When monsters talk, they try to justify themselves. They want you to understand. They want to convert you. But Leon doesn't waver. He won't let the other change him. Best of all, if you play separate ways, you can actually watch Leon fight him. As Ada, we look down into the arena and we can see Leon switching weapons, dodging attacks, popping shots at exposed eyes. Wow. This guy's way better at this fight than me. Resi 4 brings a clean inversion on Resi 2. Ada throws him the rocket launcher, just like old times. Sadler's engulfed in a glorious fireball, just like old times. The belly of the beast, Sadler's lair, the Isle of Los Illuminados, explodes as we make our escape, just like old times. But this time, something's different.
I think we both know this is where we go our separate ways.
This time, Ada doesn't abandon Leon. She offers him a lift, and he turns her down. It deliberately mirrors Resident Evil 2. Leon and Ada on a platform, the world about to collapse around them, but the dynamic is different. In 2, Ada plays him. In 4, he chooses to let her go. This time, he's not being strung along, not being manipulated, not chasing after someone who doesn't want to be caught. He lets her go. He knows who he is now. He has nothing to prove. The remake's rewrite of Ada isn't just tonal, it's structural. By giving her her own arc, her own playable campaign that's beyond a surface level bolt-on, Separate Ways turns her from foil into parallel. Both she and Leon are strangers in a strange land, both infected, both survivors, but only one of them chooses to let go.
cute.
We ride out on a jet ski as a timer ticks down. It's ridiculous, it's over the top, and it's so Resident Evil. But crucially, it feels earned. You've been through hell, you've trudged through parasite-infested water, fought a castle's worth of cultists, fought a bare-chested warrior in ancient ruins, and taken down a god. You deserve a jet ski. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise.
Mission accomplished, right?
Mission accomplished. When you're home safe.
Resident Evil 4 Remake isn't a reinvention, but it is a re-examination and a response to the legacy of what came before. It responds to Leon's survivor's guilt with empathy. It responds to the cult's rhetoric with morbid curiosity. It's a story about strangers. Our monsters are all estranged from something. Mendez from his faith, Krauser from his country, Salazar from his legacy, Sadler from the world. It might exploit our fear of the other, but it reminds us at every turn that we are the other. The Plaga, the villagers, the cultists, they all see Leon as a foreigner, an intruder. And maybe he is, but the horror isn't just that he's out of place. Resi 4 Remake reframes the conversation. It doesn't just ask what monsters look like, it asks how people become them, and gives examples of how we can come back from it. Hurt people don't need to hurt people. Leon and Ashley are proof that you can survive the trauma. You can face the horror and still come back human. You can fight through all of it and not become the thing you're fighting. In 2020, Jacob Geller released a video called Art Restoration and the Biggest Mod in Resident Evil History. In it, he talked about the Resident Evil 4 HD project, an attempt to upgrade all the textures in the 2005 game. Make it look like we remember it. He draws a comparison between Marin's work and Art Restoration. At around the 15-minute mark, he says something that stuck with me as I wandered through Resident Evil's Spain that isn't Spain.
Like the best art restoration, it doesn't draw attention to itself. Instead, it pushes the years away, removes the distractions of muddy graphics and botched lighting. It redirects your attention to where it should be, on simply enjoying one of the best games ever made.
Physical, literal mud can't coat a video game, but I think as we distance ourselves from games like Resident Evil 4, a psychological mud grows that we only see when we boot those games back up. It's unfair, but it's inevitable. The comment section of Jacob's video proves as much. With every tweak, every remaster, every restoration, and yes, every remake, that psychological mud grows. I can boot up the original Resident Evil 4 and appreciate its over-the-shoulder tank controls or brown stink of a color palette. But for someone who didn't play the game and has since gotten used to the modern, wet aesthetic of the RE engine, they might feel distanced from its brilliance. It's a privilege to be able to love both. I remember Resident Evil 4, and in 20 years, I'll remember Resident Evil 4 Remake.
Guilt of the survivor. Punch my card and I swear I'll go. You flick your wrist, call me an outsider. Can't see the blood, but I know. I'm a stranger in a strange place.